Welcome to the Long Take Review, a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Jen Subchakchai Bankard, and I'm here with the podcasters that let down their entire worlds. First, I'm going to make him do this until he's 90. It's PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
Friends don't let friends leave the house looking like they fight crime for the LA Rams. I'm doing well, Jen. How are you?
I'm doing great. Oh, but very regional, topical, local. Good.
Yeah,
like
local and appropriate to avoid an explicit tag, which is hard for coming up with a quote from this movie.
That is very true. And I'm so happy to say that we have a very special guest with us today. He is the Messiah. He is Marvel Jesus. It's Colby from the Colby Cast. Welcome to the LTR, Colby. You're joining us at a bit of a low point.
Well, I really am God's perfect idiot, so I'm in the right place.
Nice.
Is it wrong to tell you that I thought of using that for one of my lines and then thought that was going too far?
Only if I can share that I was so hoping that it wasn't going to be taken by anyone, because from the time I heard the line in the movie, that was the line. I'm like, this is my favorite line in the whole movie. Spoilers.
We're so happy to have Colby here with us. He hosts the Colby Cast, which is an excellent podcast. If you don't listen to it already and you like us, you will definitely like his podcast. It's him and his two sons, and they talk about all things movies, pop culture, including all things Marvel. And so, yeah, if you're listening to this specifically because we're talking about a Marvel movie, this is I will plug this again at the end of the show, but that's definitely a podcast you should be listening to. But all of our in jokes were references to the film we are here to review today, Deadpool and Wolverine. It's finally here. It's the highly anticipated and, at least so far, highly successful team-up film starring Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman as their most iconic characters. I don't think that's a controversial statement. If you're listening to us for the first time, we'll have a spoiler-free section designed for those who haven't seen the film yet. Although I'm gonna say, if you haven't seen it yet and you somehow have avoided spoilers, someone should be giving you a medal, because the internet is just so dangerous right now, including San Diego Comic-Con. Which brought out a panel of people who were in of themselves spoilers for the movie. Anyway, so if you've made it this far without spoilers and you still want to keep going, we will give a very clear alert after about the 30 to 40 minute mark, so we can shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. PT, if listeners think we're the best podcasters in the multiverse after listening to this episode, what can they do?
If you appreciate our maximum effort, if you want us to sing the entire second act of Music Man with no warm-up, if you don't think our dialect coach is the Minions, and if you listen and think it's fine, then you should subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We are hosted on Jen's Substack, which is available at thelongtake.substack.com. We're also available wherever you get your podcasts. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, YouTube, wherever. You can also follow us on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review, and on Letterboxd at the account at LTR Pod, or you can follow the hashtag also LTR Pod. Jen?
Thanks, PT. So we are just about ready to get into our discussion of Deadpool and Wolverine. But first, we have a very important, because it's Marvel themed, movie news update.
Just in off the wire, it's your Hollywood news.
And that just reminded me, Greg wanted to be on this episode, but sends his regrets. So there he is.
and he's too busy. He's too busy. He's booked everywhere.
But not so busy that he couldn't shame me into not remembering that, because I was debating whether or not we should do a movie news update for this episode, and he reminded me gently and embarrassingly that there's a ton of Marvel news coming out of San Diego Comic-Con right now. So, we're gonna start with the biggest news, but we can talk about anything that you feel like is newsworthy. But Robert Downey Jr. has been announced as coming back to the MCU, but not as Tony Stark? ? He's playing Dr. Doom, but maybe also Tony Stark. I don't know. What are our thoughts about this?
I'll share my my undoctored, unfiltered, and genuine reaction as I was scrolling and refreshing my Twitter X feed incessantly during Comic Con, especially after 6 p.m. on Saturday night in Los Angeles. When I saw this come through, first of all, I thought it was a joke. I thought somebody was trolling everybody. Secondly, when I realized it was real, I was so confused. I really was just very confused. And all these things just started going through my head. And I mean, first of all, the way that they did it was, I mean, full marks, right? To just put the whole pageantry, you have all those different dooms up there, and Kevin Feige's talking about the movie. They've pumped up the fact that, sorry to steal your thunder, Jen, but the Russo brothers, or, you know, the whole thing with that, their return. And then all of a sudden, Robert Downey Jr. is standing on the screen, on the stage, right, with the Doom hand in his mask, revealing his face. That was super cool in my mind. But then I started thinking, like, what is this? What is this? Are we supposed to be surprised and excited about this? Or is it so weird that it's going to work? Or is this a desperation move by Disney and Marvel trying to recapture some of the glory days? So I don't know where I'm at with it quite yet. I mean, anytime Robert Downey Jr. is going to be in front of cameras helping your property in any way is a good thing. So I'm going to just sort of decide that I'm going to go with that and say, yeah, I'm excited about this. Let's see what kind of a ride they take us on. But yeah, I was really confused to first start out with it.
I followed a pretty similar path. I wasn't as meticulously refreshing, but I saw the info pass across whatever screen I was looking at, and I was like, oh, huh. And just kind of feeling like, oh, that's interesting. That's a little exciting. That's also pretty weird. And yeah, I've enjoyed that there seem to be two primary video clips that got on the internet first from people in the crowd filming it. And one of them there, they have the whole buildup of like, there's only one man who could play Dr. Doom. And one of them is someone very confidently saying it's Robert Downey Jr., like whoever's filming it. And so like they seem to have like been included on this, or this was a rumor for a while. But then the other one from a more central angle is the same thing, but with the person going, it's Jared Leto. So I guess there were lots of different rumors, and there's a big cheer, so we can't tell if that person's disappointed it's not Jared Leto. But it is intriguing. I again haven't really been as like locked in as maybe I would have been like 5-6 years ago in terms of following Marvel rumors and stuff. But it does seem like there's been talk for a little while that like they're gonna try to get Robert Downey Jr. back, but like they don't know how to do that because they had such a great ending for Iron Man. So I guess this is a way around that. I also saw there might be, and this is me not being as into, not that I'm not into the comics, but I'm not as encyclopedic about my knowledge of the comics as I might be about other nerd things. And but it seemed like there's an arc in the comics somewhere where Doctor Doom takes on Tony Stark's face. So it is Doctor Doom, the character from whatever Eastern European country he's supposed to be from. I forget, like Latveria or something. That's a fictional country. But he looks like Tony Stark. So that could be what they're aiming to do here, is that he is a different person, but there's a reason that he looks like Tony Stark. But yeah, I don't know. It does feel a little bit like things are wobbling a little bit, to use the Joanna Robinson term about the MCU, and that it's like, oh, but like, what about this? You like Robert Downey Jr. and you like the movies the Russo brothers did. So like, what's up? What if we did all that again? Would that make you happy? And it seems like for a lot of people it did, but I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait 3 or 4 years to find out if this actually works well. Jen, what about you? What were your thoughts on this?
So my knee-jerk reaction when I saw this, once I realized it was real and not a joke, was, because that's also what I thought. I was like, oh, someone's trying to prank us. Because I feel like my feed is so clogged up with like fake comic book news or rumors that are trying to pass themselves off as news, that at first I was like, well, that can't be a real thing. But once I realized it was real, I actually got pretty mad. And I was like, you cowards. Like, and that was mostly because, you know, I, as someone who has really stuck by the MCU through this wobble and through these tough times, and I've really enjoyed a lot of it and been like, kept the faith that they're gonna regroup, a storyline's gonna emerge, it's gonna be great. For them to just be like, no, we're just gonna people are mad, we're just gonna go back to when you weren't mad and do all those things again, okay? We're gonna have the Russo brothers, we're gonna have Robert Downey Jr., and then you won't get mad at us anymore, right? So that was my initial reaction, but then something clicked into place when I realized, because I think I hadn't seen full coverage of the panel, just that single headline, right? And so when I went back and started looking at the like, put it in the context of the larger announcements that they were making about the movies, I was like, oh, Kang Dynasty out, Doomsday in. And I was like, that is 100% because Jonathan Majors got fired, right? So once I started thinking about it in that context, then I was like, oh, this is actually a pretty smart and savvy last minute change, considering all the things that had happened, right? So because, for those who aren't aware, though, if you're listening to this episode, my guess is you are, the whole next phase of the MCU was supposed to be built around Jonathan Majors' Kang. And, because of his conviction, right? Like, and all the all the things that he was doing as a real life person and not his character, right? He no longer can play that character. And so, everyone was speculating, like, are they going to recast Kang? What are they going to pivot? And so this actually makes sense as a pivot to be like, who can we call to get us out of this mess? Right? Robert Downey Jr. And so once I thought of it that way, of like, oh, they had to change the entire trajectory of these movies going for the next few years. What's bankable? What's safe? Like, I get it. Like, am I thrilled about it? No, but at least I understand it as a decision.
I think I fall more on your side of things as far as remaining Marvel apologist, right? Not the type that apologizes for MCU, but the kind that defends it, right? We've stayed on that ship. I think PT, if I remember correctly, you've sort of taken a step back from it because of the wobble and whatnot, and I don't blame you.
I'm on like a dinghy. I'm on like a dinghy next to the ship.
Yeah,
you got the binoculars out and you're looking. From
he's just waiting to see.
So that I agree with what you're saying there, Jen, and that's where I come in with, like, there's potential here to be really good, right? And then to sort of draw in what you were saying, PT, about this potential storyline that's out there. I didn't know that something like this existed, where someone made himself look like. I could get behind a story like that, because that, I think my first and amongst a lot of my first initial reactions was, I hope that this isn't a Tony Stark variant. That was one of my first actual story related feelings, was don't make this as, I'm okay with it, with the same actor playing a different character, but don't make it a Tony Stark variant, because I think you start treading very closely to undoing the greatness of Endgame, right? If it's a Tony Stark, and it sort of waters down the character. But if it's a character that's sort of posing as Tony, see, that's a story that I could get excited for. So Who knows? We'll see, but there's potential.
I just wish there was a movie in the MCU that has to wrestle with the really great end to a character, but then they want to bring him back. So what do they do to handle that?
Spoilers.
But
very dangerously close.
Again, it's literally in the title of the movie. I do think I want to make sure it's clear. I don't know if I correctly read this information that there is a comic arc where Dr. Doom takes the face of Tony Stark. It might have been just like an image that someone drew. Like, it's definitely the cover of a comic book, but it might have been like a what if sort of thing. And it might, so I don't know. I don't want to get your hopes up too high, Colby.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because you've put it out in the universe. So now it's floating out there. One of the Russos is gonna pop right under their forehead, and they're like, "This is it. We cracked the story."
And yet I won't get paid for it. But I think that one of the interesting things on a maybe like meta or even like super meta level about all this is that, in nerddom, in movie fandom, and maybe I'm particularly focused on thinking about the Marvel and the DC universes, plus, of course, my beloved Star Wars, that there's been so much fixation within the fandom about planning. And it's like, well, you have to have this planned, and this is all planned out. But like, these things are by necessity not planned. They have to be able to react to sort of what happens from story to story and beat to beat. And that, like, shifting away from Kang, obviously, it's the right thing to do, because Jonathan Majors is not been acting like a good person, and so he needs to not be rewarded for that behavior, and so he can go and deal with his personal issues and not be a central figure of an entire arc of very successful movies. But like, the same thing could have happened with Thanos after like the first dozen Marvel movies, and they're just like, well, we're not going to do the Thanos thing. It's like, someone else comes in and kills Thanos in the first like 5 minutes of a movie, and then it's like, well, what about building up Thanos? They're like, we were just doing that to make sure this person looked even more powerful. And so there's always a way around like the quote unquote plan. So I think that there is the possibility that despite all of the Kang build up and all the moving of the chess pieces to get them into position for the next thing they had planned to do, that pivoting to a Doctor Doom story could be really good. He's also, I feel like, the Marvel villain that's never been portrayed in a way that people are like, yes, they've just gotten Doctor Doom in a way that I think there's a lot of excitement about. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see, and it will be interesting if it's like Robert Downey Jr. the whole way through. If it's there's just Doctor Doom behind a mask who could be anybody for a little while, and then there's a reason he takes the mask off. So yeah, it's definitely a big deal. It is very curious that there's more of a, not like blowback, but I think there's more people being like, oh, like, is this, are they even more in trouble than I thought? Because it feels like such a correction. But I think that, Jen, your point is correct, that it's more of a overall recovery from having to shift from their plans. And this is a way to make people, in a way, almost like not look at their plans and be like, don't think about the plans, think about this, like, good or bad, think about Robert Downey Jr.
So in terms of like how much FaceTime we're going to get, this does feel a lot like Pedro Pascal as Mando, where he agrees to continue to do it because he doesn't have to be on set all the time. Right?
That's a good call. That's a really good call.
Yeah. But I was Googling furiously while you were talking, and I believe that the most relevant comic run is called Infamous Iron Man. And it's by Brian Michael Bendis, who's, a pretty famous name in the comics. And it follows Victor Von Doom as he takes on the persona of Iron Man after Civil War II. That's the sort of Wikipedia log line. So there's a bunch of people on Reddit very angrily clarifying that this storyline is not Tony Stark as Doctor Doom, it's Doctor Doom becoming Tony Stark. So
people, if there's angry on Reddit.
I know, right?
Who would have thought?
That's the first thing I found, is a bunch of Reddit forums being like, meh, like, in both directions. I
feel like Reddit crawled so Twitter could run, right? To that point, Jen, we've seen, and I am not a comic. I don't have a comic history. I didn't read comics growing up. My Marvel knowledge is really all based on the MCU and growing with the MCU as it grew. And I spent copious amounts of time spending, reading, learning, consuming as much as I could as the MCU grew. So I feel like I can speak very intelligently towards that, but maybe not necessarily the comics, which I feel is beneficial for me because I don't have any affiliation or any dedication or any soft spots to comic storylines or characters. I see what the MCU has done with them. And I feel like that's a good filter, at least for me, because they've changed so much from what I've learned retroactively about comics because it's made so many people mad. And I just realized this is not the comics. This is the MCU. So they're doing things that they feel serves the story best for them. They don't want to just rehash story points and character arcs that we've already seen of decades of comics, right? So if they could hybridize or sort of mutantize, for lack of a better phrase, some type of Tony, why does he have the face of Tony Stark, if he will, but he's Victor Von Doom? I'm all for it. Let's go. Let's do it.
So, who else is saying let's go? Deadpool Wolverine. So this movie breaking all kinds of box office records. I think this news will be a good way to segue into our actual review of the movie. It's the 6th highest grossing opening weekend of all time at this point. I think before it broke that record, it was the highest grossing R-rated opening weekend of all time. And now it's just like 6th in overall. And so is it too soon to ask the question of like, why do you think this is? Or should we just try to get to that in the review? Or do you have any reaction to this news? I'll open it up.
My main reaction to great, good. That's very good. I like that there are 2 Star Wars movies that are still like up in the top 5, which I guess I just hadn't been aware of, including the best movie of the top 5, The Last Jedi. I'm not being ironic; it's an excellent movie. But yeah, that's great. You know, we're so back in terms of the movies, in terms of the box office. I do wonder about its legs just because of the R rating. Like, I think that like these movies frequently have a big rush. I mean, all blockbusters maybe, but especially big franchise blockbusters have a big rush in the first week, and because people want to see it, and this is a movie that clearly was going to have a bunch of potential spoilers. So the people I know who were really into it were just like, I'm going Thursday afternoon. Like Greg, again, not present, but he got the first possible showing on the East Coast, trying to be like, no, as long as no one from Europe spoils it for me, I'm fine. Or the premiere. And so, you know, I think that it's inevitably going to be front loaded, but I'm wondering how front loaded, because I think the buzz is generally really good, but there is still the sort of, you know, cap of technically people under 17, realistically people under like 13 or 14 are not going to be able to just run off and see the movie on their own in the middle of summer. And so I wonder if it will have a precipitous fall more than one might expect, considering its again sort of generally positive reaction to it, and if that's going to lead to a bunch of hand wringing in a week about like, oh my god, the box office, it fell like 72%, like what's happening, and it's just because it's R-rated, and it's, you know, it got past that for the first weekend, but it's still gonna maybe put a bit of a ceiling on it, which means, oh no, maybe it'll only be the 2nd highest grossing movie of the year instead of the first. I don't know, Colby, what do you think?
It's based on first weekend information and news. It seems like it's going to have one of those juggernaut type of runs, right? But I know enough to know that the real telltale sign is what you've already referenced, and it's that second weekend. I think we'll know a lot more after that second weekend. So we'll see. I guess I will say put a pin in that in my mind. But I got to tell you, walking out of this theater, going home and sort of chewing on it over the evening and thinking about what I just experienced, I came to the conclusion that I'm rooting for this to make $1 billion. I want this movie to make $1 billion. I think this movie deserves to make $1 billion. And I don't want to get too far ahead in our talk and agenda and tip my hat as to how I felt about it. But it has that feel for, look, again, we're getting into other sections of you know, I don't want to tiptoe into the recommendation algorithm.
Asked about this. That's what I was like, oh no, this is going to open a can of worms I'm not ready for.
Yeah, so maybe I'm going to reserve what I was going to say about that to get to give myself some material into that section. But I feel like, and I'm no expert, but I feel like this is a movie that could make $1 billion, which needs to have a good, healthy, long run, right? And end up being top grosser of the year and whatnot. I mean, it certainly has that feel coming out of the first weekend. So I guess time will tell.
I'll just also note that there's really no strong competition for a little while. There's Trap, the new M. Night Shyamalan movie that's got some buzz. People are excited about it, but I don't see that being like $80 million opening weekend kind of level of movie. That's this coming Friday, August 2nd. And then the week after that, it's Borderlands, which, I mean, that already feels like we're quickly in the dregs of August.
Starring Oscar winners Cate Blanchett and
Jamie Lee Curtis.
Lee Curtis.
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, that may get people who just want to see another movie, and is also kind of weirdly in the raunchy action comedy, like Guardians of the Galaxy.
It's basically a James Gunn movie, not by James Gunn.
Right. It's Guardians of the Galaxy, but like in a Mad Max kind of wasteland. but still PG-13. And so I wonder if the folks that would find that appealing would be like, let's just do a third or fourth viewing of Deadpool Wolverine. So, to counter what I was saying earlier, it's possible that audiences who do go see this just keep returning to it for the next couple weeks.
If I could chime in just from the podcasting, a popular culture podcaster perspective, usually what I do is I look ahead to see, what am I going to cover on my podcast? What am I going to want to talk to my two boys about? What am I going to invest the time and my resources into producing a show about? Which means spending $45, $50 potentially at a theater, because I have to have my wild cherry icy, and then spending the time in front, getting my two 20-something-year-old kids' schedule to coincide with mine, sit down, record, produce, and everything that goes along with that. And I have to tell you, so I put the things that potentially could make it onto the podcast on my calendar. I don't have anything in the month of August as far as movies go. Nothing at all. The one that I'm most excited about that may get onto the podcast to talk about is Beetlejuice. And that's first weekend of, I think that's Labor Day weekend. But yeah, so nothing in August. So to your point, PT, there's no competition here. So I think that, especially for this audience, I think the audience is going to continue to go because they want to spend their money on this rather than the other films that you've mentioned.
I will say that's disrespect to Alien Romulus, but that's fine.
Zero interest in that movie. I've never seen an Alien movie, so
they
I'm
need
sorry.
to get out there marketing that movie better. Like, that's all I'll say.
I saw the trailer. They showed that trailer before Deadpool Wolverine are showing, and I'm like, I don't want to watch this trailer anymore. Can this be over?
Okay, we have a strong disagreement, because I thought there was a new trailer for Deadpool and Wolverine, which I thought was like telling too much like blah blah story stuff. But maybe it was a teaser trailer that didn't like get into any character backstory. I actually was going to nominate as like the best trailer of the summer. I was like, this is so good. It's got like, it was just like they're playing with sound things, but I also like the Alien movies. So maybe you gotta already have bought it.
This one seems to be going back less cerebral sci-fi, which I feel like Prometheus, Covenant has sort of been more inching towards, and going back to its roots as a space horror movie. And that's the thing that's making me hesitate, where I'm like, this is too squiggly. I don't know if I can watch it. Like, there's too many things eating other creepy people.
Yes.
But I'm willing to give it a go for the pod. I'm willing to rewatch all the Alien movies and then go see this movie.
I'll argue you only have to rewatch the first two Alien movies, and then everything else is fine.
The last thing I'll say about Deadpool Wolverine, and then we should move on, is that anecdotally, I've talked to lots of people who have not yet had a chance to see this movie and are chomping at the bit to do so. So I would bet that week 2, week 3 still hold steady, and also the word of mouth, because I've had lots of people conversationally with me being like, "You've seen this, right? Is it good? I'm so excited to see it." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's good." And then they're like, "Yeah, I'm gonna go see it." So I feel like, again, that's anecdotal evidence, but I feel like that could be indicative of the legs that this movie could have. And the last bit I'll bring up is the Hollywood Reporter had an interview with Ryan Reynolds, who calls this a 4-quadrant R-rated movie. The first of its kind, I would assume. Right? So that, I don't know, that might be going too far. But I do think that it has the records it's breaking is of the R-rated movie, right? Like most of all. So
Jen, I don't mean to put you on the spot, and it's because I honestly don't know the answer to it. So it's totally okay if you don't either. What are the 4 quadrants? Like, I use that phrase, and I've always heard that phrase. Is it just old, young, men, women?
I think so.
Okay.
I always assumed it was gender and age. So hold on. To the internet.
Okay, so I think, according to the article you're referencing, if my AI droid has lied to me, I apologize to the world. But it listed the 4 quadrants because it said first 4 quadrant R-rated film, emphasizing its blend of humor, action, and emotional depth aimed at a wide audience despite its violent content.
Yeah, so I think the idea is like the R rating is not going to stop people
right
from watching the movie, I think is the idea. Okay, so Wikipedia defines the 4-quadrant movie as the little graphic they have is male over 25, female over 25, male under 25, and female under 25. So yeah, it's what we said. It's like this this sort of matrix of age and gender.
Is that a fancy way of just saying everyone?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think
the point is that it's like it's bringing those groups together whereas they would normally go off and watch their own things, right?
Got it.
Yeah, it's from the studio schedule construction mindset of like, we have a princess movie that's for the under 25 female quadrant. We have a Arnold Schwarzenegger action movie, adult men, like older men, and then there's movies that could overlap. And then if you could hit all four, that's blockbuster, baby. Like that's going to get you a bunch of money, theoretically.
All right, let's get into
25 being old. That's fun. Yeah, that makes me happy.
Right. I wasn't thinking about that too hard. So the short take is what we'll start with. What was your general reaction to Deadpool and Wolverine?
I had a blast. I had an absolute blast at the movie theater. I'll just borrow from, I think, my tweet and my social media post that I put out there, which was, I just said that these two stars, and you can add the director, Sean Levy, in there, they took us on a wild ride, an absolute blast of a time in the movie theater, which is why we go see the movies for the most part, right? You want to have, this is a great superhero summer blockbuster flick. And we'll get to the details and whatnot. But I'll share that I think that the story was fun enough to keep things moving forward, but it was all the rest of it that got the laughs, that got the excitement. And it was something, I enjoyed this movie more than any other Marvel movie since No Way Home. So that's where I sort of fall on that.
Nice. How about you, PT?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it was a really good time at the movie theater. It wasn't, super deep. It wasn't trying to be like some, something it wasn't. It's in the vein of the earlier Deadpool movies. It was fun listening to Jen and Greg on the retrospective episode leading up to it. And they're both very good people who are just like, I don't usually truck with this kind of
I retrospect
humor, and I'm like, give it to me, baby, let's go. I'm gross. So yeah, like, I mean, that stuff's pretty fun. And yeah, I think that anything that would trip people up, and maybe I don't want to get ahead into the recommendation algorithm, but anything that might be like, well, what if people wouldn't like this? It's just like, well, I don't know what you were expecting. Like this did exactly what it said on the box, and that is not meant as disrespect in any way. It was as advertised, and it was very fun. So Jen, what about you?
So this movie made me incredibly happy. Nice. I was grinning ear to ear when I came out of the theater. And part of that is because it is actually a lot more sentimental about a certain period of comic book movie history than I would have expected. We'll get into that as we get into other sections. And so it really it was kind of made for me in that sense. And I would say that like a few points in this, mostly in the form of the cameos that we talked a lot about on the prep episode, genuinely shocked me. Like that's just a thrill to experience in a theater with a live audience. Like I knew I was going to be in for a good time when just the Marvel opening credits, like the logo came up and someone screamed at the top of their lungs, "Let's go," except it was the explicit version. Let's go from that we've seen in the advertisements, the R-rated advertisements. So like it was it was a thrill. We'll get into, do I think it's a perfect movie? No, it's not flawless at all, but I don't think it matters at all either. Because the things I loved about it were so satisfying to watch that I wasn't even paying attention to anything else, honestly. So yeah, that's a different way of saying it delivered on, it says what it is on the box, right? Like I came for something, I got it, and I had a great time. So yeah. But who else is going to have a great time, I think, is what I want to talk about. Wow, I'm really I'm on fire with these segues today. It's not
Man.
normal. It must be because Colby's here. But
The best
so
part
let's
is calling out the segues every time you do that. That's
I'm gonna
the
edit
mark
along.
of a great segue.
I'm gonna edit that out. Most likely. So
I
that's
feel
why
like
I'm saying it, because it's for you.
I feel like that's a fourth wall breaking moment. You are
that's true.
acknowledging.
That's true. You can keep that.
So maybe it's Deadpool that's giving me this power.
Yeah, it's clearly
So-
not me, even though I am Marvel Jesus, or so you say.
Yeah, we said it, therefore it's true.
I mean, you've been here for 2 movies so far. It's Guardians of the Galaxy 3 and this. That's 2 for 2.
This is true. This
Yeah.
is true.
Those are the 2 best Marvel movies since No Way Home, as referenced earlier.
Yeah, let the record show. So the recommendation algorithm, we acknowledge that not every movie is for everyone. So we want to talk about who are we recommending Deadpool and Wolverine to? And in particular, like, what subset of comic book movie fan will get the jokes in this movie? That's like, in terms of how much knowledge do you have to have going to this? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, this one's hard because it's sort of like who needs this movie recommended to them? Like, who's the person that is like unaware this movie's happening, or is like, I don't know, that like isn't kind of already there? I mean, I guess the answer would be people who got off comic book movies like 5+ years ago, where they were like, I'm not doing this anymore. I don't know. It's like, maybe come back, both because, you know, while this references a bunch of other stuff, it's not like super beholden to like what's currently happening in the MCU, and it does also truck in a bunch of references of the last 25 years of comic book adaptations, and there may be a bunch of stuff that even if you've checked out of what's happening now, it's like, well, come back, because there's going to be stuff that ties into things that you love and that you cared about back in the day. As long as you like, you know, super violent, R-rated, you know, a lot of swearing in your jokes kind of movies as well.
I think the short answer for me is that it's made for, Jen, you touched on it. It's made for fans like you. It's made for fans like me. People that have been heavily invested in superhero movies, specifically Marvel movies, over the last 25 years. ... and 14-year-old boys. That's the audience. That's the audience.
Okay.
But as I sort of think, it's definitely not made for people like my wife, who, God bless her soul, puts up with all of my pop culture nerdery and went to the movies with me to watch this and chuckled once. That's not a reflection of her taste. Just she's not invested in this kind of thing like I am. She didn't get those references. She didn't get the cameos. She thought it was fun. It was a fun ride. But, you know, Disney still got her money, right? Because she paid for the ticket. But I think beyond that, it's almost like a Ryan Reynolds / Hugh Jackman flex, saying to the world, we know that you guys love us so much as these characters, you're going to give us $1 billion because that's what this is for. Right. And I think they're right. So beyond that, you know, I do think that you can go and have fun with it, being sort of a general fan, sort of like a surface level fan. But I actually thought about this during the movie, first half especially. I'm like, how many people actually are getting these references that, like me, I'm getting them, but how many of how many of me are in the world, you know, and God help us if there's more than a few. But I actually thought about that during the movie. I think as it shifted into the second half of the movie, then it started to pick up more like, oh, general audiences, if they've made it to this far, they're going to enjoy the rest of the ride.
Yeah, the thing I kept wondering was, we were just talking about age demographics in the 4-quadrant movie idea, right? Like, do you have to have been with these movies, especially the 20th Century Fox X-Men movies? Do you have to have been on that journey to really appreciate this movie? Because and with the exception, I think, and that's a really good point, Colby, there's enough slapstick and enough action and enough sort of like general humor in this that I think if you are a 14-year-old who's really into Deadpool's whole thing, then I think you're probably they're getting enough out of this movie. But I feel like on a deeper level, someone who's young enough to not have been around for like to have started at the X-Men movie in 2000, right? I'm like, what? Like, are you not just like, because like, and this is really hard to say without doing any spoilers. But I feel like there's enough reverence for those movies and kind of that history that I don't know if I would appreciate it as much as I do if I didn't get all of those jokes and if I didn't understand sort of the I don't know, this is like a celebration of not just Deadpool and Wolverine as characters, but as Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman specifically as actors in these movies. You know what I mean? Like that is as much a part of the story to me. What this is not, and to go back to recommendation algorithm, if you are only going to watch this movie because you're like, I just really need to know what's going to happen with the MCU and like what our next story building block is going to be, this is going to completely disappoint you 100%. Like it is, there's nothing in here that's like, oh, giving you a breadcrumb of like, this is how we're going to get to Avengers Doomsday, right? This is entirely focused on the past.
That's a good point.
And so, yeah, so that's the thing. I'm like, there's certain jokes in here that if you are under a certain age, I don't even know if you understand what they're even remotely referencing. Like,
I saw and I can't remember where I saw this. It was in a published review somewhere that said beyond the sort of lists of the early Deadpool movies, the X-Men movies, all these other things of what you should know to get the jokes, you should have a subscription to The Hollywood Reporter because there are so many references to like people's personal lives and like business components and like the MCU and Disney and Fox merging. And there's all this stuff that's the behind the scenes thing that the hyper fans and the hyper online and big movie nerds and big comic book nerds and big comic book movie nerds are all like into and obsessed with. And that's really baked in. And it was funny. I saw this, unlike I think the two of you, I know Jen, I didn't see this until Sunday. I still somehow avoided most of the spoilers. When we get to spoilers, maybe I'll say one or two things that I had heard. But like I saw this at my beloved Alamo downtown, which is not like the downside of the like everyone be quiet and everyone just like watch the movie is like people will react, but there's not as much of the like no one's gonna yell out,
right? There's no hooting and hollering
in the beginning of the movie, but like because of the crowd that draws, those jokes, those like Hollywood insider jokes, got way more laughs than references to Marvel properties and other Marvel characters. Like,
it's not even enough to have seen all of the movies that are referenced here. You have to have lived through the release and the pop culture phenomenon of them, right? To really get everything, right?
Totally agree.
Yeah. But so then, that to me was super fascinating. I was not expecting it at all.
Yeah. It is also like, you don't have to get everything. Like, I think, there's, we watched Spaceballs the other day, just sort of to throw on like a goofy movie. We watched Spaceballs, and I was like, we were pointing out the jokes of like, oh, the first time we, both of us obviously separately when we were children watched this movie, is like we didn't get that, like we didn't know what that was. We didn't know what that was talking about, because it's adult humor or it's like a reference to something that like we didn't know about. So like you could still go in, love and enjoy a movie that has references that go over your head. And if you want to be a person that goes and watches the hour and 20-minute Easter egg explanation videos online, like you can go and do that. Or you can just sort of be like, yeah, I only got like a third of those jokes, but like I thought those jokes were funny and I still had a good time. I think sorry, Jen, I think in terms of like who shouldn't go is anybody who like kind of knows that they don't like this, which is very like obvious maybe to say, but like this, no one who doesn't like Ryan Reynolds is going to be won over by Ryan Reynolds in this movie. Like Ryan Reynolds is doing his shtick. No one who's like, I'm sick of superhero movies where there's just these fights and there's a bunch of CGI action and blah, blah, blah. That's still what happens. If you're sick of these movies, I don't know if this is going to win you over unless you're like, I wish they weren't referencing the future I don't care about. I wish they referenced the past that I cared about. Then maybe. But if you're the kind of person that's like, they need to invest in adult dramas and there shouldn't be any more, $200 million budgets for comic book movies, guess what? This is a $200 million comic book movie. Like, you're not going to like it. It's not trying to make any arguments to get you into the door in a way that maybe, say, Logan was. Like, Logan was like, but like, what if we told a story and it was more serious and blah, 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 and that people could kind of get over their problems with this? Like, this is reveling in the juvenilia of these kind of movies.
Yeah, it definitely leads in. I think so. All that said, and this is what's going to close out recommendation algorithm, I think. Do you actually recommend that anyone do any kind of homework before they go see this movie if they haven't yet?
I think they should listen to the long take reviews, Deadpool Wolverine retrospective, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Which was invaluable to me because I listened to that and looked at it and said, oh, I can do this instead of spending potentially 10 hours in front of a screen watching hand-picked movies, which I then did anyway.
Oh, that's right. You did.
But I did that as a tool to stay off of the internet on Friday so that I could avoid spoilers. So I literally just had, I ended up watching the first 2 X-Men movies. I watched, even though I didn't want to, but I did, the Origins Wolverine movie, just to be reminded.
We said specifically not to.
No, but I don't follow directions well. I don't follow directions very well at all. And then I capped it off with Logan. And I'm very glad that I actually watched that set of movies because the first 2 X-Men movies are good. Wolverine, Hugh Jackman has the best hair of the character is in that Origins movie. So that's enough to watch it. And then Logan is just Logan. And it was very timely for what we ended up seeing in this movie. No spoilers, of course, but yes. Yeah, that's the homework that I did. But I never like to tell people you have to spend time to be ready to see this movie. I'd love it if we could just show up, but in this subset now of movie going, it's just not realistic. You sort of have to have some kind of homework done, and that's one of the reasons why I'm such a fan of that Disney Plus show called Legends, which are like 10-minute highlight reels of these characters.
Recaps,
right. And I didn't see any. I checked the day of and I didn't see any pop up. I don't know if they're there now, but those I think are invaluable to moviegoers.
I feel like they don't want to mix Deadpool stuff in with something that like you might let a kid be like, yeah, go watch your 10-minute recap shows of the Scarlet Witch. And then they stumble onto the Deadpool one in the rotation.
100%. Absolutely.
So, but yeah, that would be great to have that. I personally did we rewatched the first 2 Deadpools and Logan just to sort of say like, where were we? I didn't want to even try to start to wrestle with all the other X-Men and all the other Wolverine movies. But I felt that was very good. Like I was like, okay, I'm glad I did that. I think it got me grounded in, like, it's weird to say grounded in the Deadpool like lore because in a way none of it matters because that's kind of the point of Deadpool. But it did get me back like sort of excited for the vibes, and maybe we can talk more about it in the spoiler area. But like for me, I think I said this, but I don't know if it was on mic before, that the last few years, I don't know if anyone else here has watched the Welcome to Wrexham documentary series, which is about Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia team up to purchase a low-level soccer / football team in Wales. And it's them sort of, saying like, okay, like we're just big outsiders coming in and doing this, but it's about the town. And it's been really a really good and heartwarming series about this team and about these 2 people like laughing at themselves as outsiders. And I feel like it's really made for me, it softened the edges of Ryan Reynolds in a way where like his shtick was running a little bit thin with me because he does kind of have one mode that he hits, which is great. And it fits Deadpool so well, but then he kept putting out all these other movies where he's still doing that. But like having this other zone where it's like, oh yeah, it's just him kind of being funny, but making fun of himself, that I don't know. It going back to the first 2 Deadpool movies after 3 seasons of Welcome to Wrexham, I was much more open in my heart to the experience, and I'd already liked them, but I liked them a lot more because I didn't have any sort of chip on my shoulder, I guess, about him. So I thought that was good. It helped set up the expectation that of what we were going to get. But Yeah, I mean, I think it's fine if you just sort of go in with whatever it is that you know. If you have whatever history you have, however much or little that is already inside, like trying to cram like it's a test is probably going to make it less fun than just going and seeing what are the references you pick up on. And and if you don't pick up on some, like, you'll be fine. You can still, there's another joke coming in like 10 seconds.
All right, I think I can't take it anymore. We got to get into spoiler mode. So if you have not seen Deadpool and Wolverine, and again, you have done the noble effort to, to not have it spoiled by the internet, please don't let us do it for you. Like don't ruin it now. You can do this. Go watch the film and rejoin us for the rest of the conversation. So I want to start with just by like attacking the criticism, because I have loads of questions, much more questions about just like what we loved about this, what are our favorite things about it. But I do want to start with the sort of the main critiques that movie critics and Marvel critics have leveled. So the main thing is that there's just no story. This seems to be a casual phrase that everyone throws around, like, yeah, there's no story to speak of, but it's still funny, right? Like that's the thing I've heard in different forms over and over again. Do you agree? Do you feel like this movie was all jokes, nothing else?
Luke and I spent a good amount of time talking about this on our recap about the movie that's out there for everybody. We did touch quite a bit about the story. I think there's a story. You can argue whether it's a good story or a mediocre story or a bad story, but there's a story. To say there's no story is just it's not genuine. You're not using your intellect. You're just going for the low hanging fruit. That's the Twitter hot take, right? There's no story, right? So I mean, there's a very straightforward story. So maybe you don't like straightforward stories. But I think, and we're going to get more into details, but the story is built so that you can sort of see Deadpool go from a selfish character to more of a selfless character. I'm not going to say he's fully noble, right? But he has selfish intentions, and he goes on this journey that takes him to a more selfless place. You can't do that without a story. And then you have an entire arc with Logan / Wolverine centered around guilt and, getting over the past and learning to play well with others, in a sense. And you can't do that without a story as well. So, yeah, I think it's disingenuous, I think is the word I was stumbling around for, to say that there's no story. Again, you can argue the finer points of how good of a story it is, but there's enough there to have kept things moving forward, in my opinion.
Yeah, I feel like the no story argument would mostly be coming from the people who watch movies to log Wikipedia bullet points about like what's happening in the larger. It's like, well, I don't even know if any of this mattered. Like what even happened? Like, blah, blah, I don't even know what's going on. Then it's like, sure, but that's not what's important. Like that isn't actually a narrative. Like a narrative is the arcs of the characters and the conflicts that arise between them. And I think it's somewhat inevitable in the way that the character of Deadpool has been presented across the three movies, that sometimes the stakes are constantly undermined by the jokes and by the references and by the sort of fourth wall breaking meta commentary of things. So I think that does impact the feeling that we normally can associate, even with, as sort of Colby was saying, like there's bad stories, but you can still be connected to it. I think sometimes there's a bunch of disconnect because we step out of it so often. But if you outline the story, like there's arcs for our two main characters. There's things that they're trying to do. There's objectives they have, blocks that occur, conflicts that arise between them. So like that does all happen. I think it's, again, this sort of goes back to the recommendation algorithm. If you are like, well, I don't like when a story isn't told sincerely because we're too busy joking about everything, then you're not going to connect with this. Like, this is just not going to be something that works for you, because that's what's happening. But, to say there's no story, I think it's shorthand for the stuff that people connect with, and the stuff that seems to be the most focused on are the jokes and the references and the sort of fun of all of that. And if you don't find that fun, there's not a lot left to be like, well, what's the dramatic movement happening underneath. It's like, well, all right, there's not a ton of that, but it's there, and there, it has a skeleton. So literally and also figuratively, there's a skeleton that holds the movie up.
So for me, this is one of those cases where it's really important to distinguish between story and plot, because I think the plot of this movie doesn't matter at all, right? Like all the stuff with like, you know, the Succession guy in the TVA, his desire to go rogue, and Cassandra Nova is ruler of the void, and she wants to do all this like timey-wimey stuff to then take over, so everywhere is the void, and then she can be ruler over everything. Like that stuff is all like not MacGuffin nonsense, right? And that's the plot. That's like what is happening, the events of the story. The story to me in this movie is really all happening, like both of you have sort of alluded to, at the level of character, right? It's the character arc of of Deadpool and Wolverine, and how they can find some sort of sense of redemption and peace and self-esteem, sort of amidst all the baggage that they carry with them, when they arrive at this like multiversal like nonsense plot. So, and I think they actually did that really well, at least for me. But again, I have, especially with Wolverine, I have a pretty, you can go listen to our other episode that we recorded with Greg, but like I have a pretty substantial history with Wolverine as a character and attachment to Wolverine as a character. Less so with Deadpool, but I think by now I'm very much invested in Deadpool as a character. And so for me, it was really easy to be like, oh, I'm so invested in these two specific versions of these characters, finding that piece, right? And that sense of like, okay, I'm not the worst. Right? Which I think is the thing. And the other thing I really underestimated was how important that opening scene with Happy at the Avengers compound. Because like if you are not really paying attention, or if you were out getting popcorn during that scene, I can totally see how you're like, what is the point of this movie, right? At least for Deadpool, right? Because I think that's the hook for Deadpool, is the idea that you can't just be a hero as like a resume item, or because you want to make other people happy. You have to do it because you feel like you have to do it yourself, right? Like it's like you're doing the right thing but for the wrong reasons, right? And then by the end, as Colby was saying, he sort of flips around where he's like, no, like I want to sacrifice myself, not because it's going to impress Vanessa, but because I know it's the right thing to do, right? And he kind of gets to that place. So yeah, for me it was definitely enough. But again, I wondered if you hadn't been along for the ride up until that point, because I do think there's a lot of the movie relies a lot on us importing our backstory for the characters, right? Like if you've never read a Wolverine comic or seen a movie with Wolverine in it before seeing this, like I don't know what you get out of it.
That's a good point, and I'm trying to look into, or if I could put my hand through the skull of someone who hasn't lived with these characters for 25 years, which I thought was super gross and so much fun to
gnarly.
watch.
It's like
But it was really well executed. Like
yeah,
they made that look really good. I'm just trying to get into the brain of somebody like you're describing. And is the journey that these two characters, is it a buddy cop movie enough to make it entertaining for them, if they don't have to be weighed down by all the references and cameos and what does this mean? Was that if they're only focusing on these two characters, I would like, this might be the optimist in me, but I would like to think that there's enough there to get a fan of just storytelling and characters through the end of the movie and be like, yeah, what I really enjoyed was the relationship between the two main stars. I think there's enough there. Again, you can debate whether it's effective, good or bad, but if you took away all the surrounding extra stuff and just bore it down to the title of the movie, Deadpool and Wolverine, I mean, they're the story, right? They're the ones that go on that journey, and the dynamic between those two characters, I would like to think, is enough for just the common person to be like, yeah, I identified with those guys. I don't know what anything else meant, but I liked those guys. I don't know. Am I looking for the pie in the sky there?
I don't think that's pie in the sky. I am very curious. It's funny how the movie is very clearly not made for those people. Like they're like they I'm not saying that they rejected them or whatever, but it feels like they didn't spend too much time trying to care about that.
Right.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Which was
And
probably
that's
smart,
fine.
honestly.
I think that's
Yeah.
fine. Like, it is interesting because it's like I can't even picture someone doing this. Like, I can't even picture someone being like, "I'm just going to start here." Like, what? This is a good jumping in point, and I'll find out what happens. Now, again, maybe there's just like enough spectacle, and there's enough between the two characters, and there's jokes that are just jokes. Frequently about bodily functions or parts that people can be like, okay, like I'm here, I'm enjoying this, and it's like, oh, this guy, there's lots of different versions of this character, and he's drunk a lot, like, and he's angry. Okay, like, you don't need to know about, like, I guess there was someone named Chuck, like, cool, like they can piece it together. But the people who are complaining aren't complaining because of that. Like, they're not complaining because they're like, what about my grandfather? He can't follow this. It's either people who are like, I'm sick of comic book movies, and this is a particularly comic book movie, or it's people who are like, this isn't the comic book movie I wanted. And, I don't know. Like, that's what I don't know what to tell you. Like, I'm glad that they just made the movie that they wanted to make. If we're going to get into any sort of like critique zone, I would say, like, this had not quite at the level of a Dark Knight Rises, but it did have that sort of weird, like, oh, so you just stopped. Like, you stopped being Deadpool for a while, and you don't have like the love of your life who is so like locked in for the first two movies. Like, it almost felt a little bit like too much of a reset for like, and I don't have anything.
Right. They stacked too much against him, kind of.
Yeah, where like that felt a little weird. That felt disjointed, having gone back to the first two movies for the first time since second one came out, 2018, maybe 2019, that like I hadn't watched either of them since then, that it was like, oh, like I'm like pretty invested, I guess, in this. This seems like a good, solid relationship in the world of comic book movies, where people frequently just sort of float in and out. That it felt like that was supposed to be a real deal thing. It was weird that they're just like, yeah, anyway, she's gone, and also she's dating someone else. But anyway, she's not really in this movie, so don't worry about it. But he wants to save her.
But it's really important.
So. Yeah, but he wants to save her and his other friends, which again is maybe like that's enough of a thread for the events of this movie. But like I find it curious there, and maybe this is just, it makes sense because of the character. There aren't enough people that are like, you have betrayed the narrative of the first two Deadpool movies by having him not spend time and beyond just a vague investment with like wanting to save these people in his life. Like, we don't really see that. He just says it all the time, that he wants to do that. But I don't think that's enough to like undermine the enjoyment of the movie. But yeah, I don't know. That was my complaint.
So there were 3 scenes in this that genuinely got me emotional.
Mm-mm.
And I'm realizing now that only one of them actually features Ryan Reynolds, so I don't know what that says. But so the first one is Wolverine with X-23, Daphne Keane. And when she says, he's like, I'm just the wrong guy. And she's like, well, you were always the wrong guy until you weren't, right? Like, that moment, and maybe that's because Logan's so good that was, again, I was able to be like, that, porting that story in that moment. But I thought that was really good, right? And then the moment when Wolverine is talking to Cassandra Nova about Charles Xavier, and like is like sparing her and explaining that, like, well, this is what your brother meant to me, and this is what I learned from him, and he would want me to do that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I was like, oh my gosh, the X-Men. Like,
Patrick
this
Stewart,
is so good. Yeah. Like, he did teach you that. And then the third thing, and this is legitimately, I'm suppressing because I don't want to embarrass myself. I'm suppressing tears. Is the behind the scenes reel at the end of Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds on the sets of all these movies they've been in. And it's stupid because they're playing the Green Day song that my high school yearbook used, and I'm sure everybody's high school yearbook used, right? It's so overtly in your face cliche. And yet I couldn't help but feel something. I was like, wow, this is crazy that like these two actors and me as someone watching their movies has gone through this, like, and And I went back and watched the first X-Men movie the other day after I had seen this movie, and I'm like, Hugh Jackman is a baby in this movie. This is crazy. His face is a baby face.
It really is.
Like, what have we done to this man? Like,
he's one of those people where you're like, oh, Hugh Jackman hasn't aged until you go back and watch something
like, oh,
from
yeah.
30 years
Like-
ago, and you're like, oh my God, he looks 13.
Oh, he has aged. He's just aged really well.
well, that's the thing. He's done the George Clooney aging of like,
Yeah.
like it doesn't matter because he's gotten better looking with age somehow. Like,
It helps.
like the age is making him more distinguished. It's the it's
Colby
it's
and
an
I
unfortunate
understand this.
gender.
We know. We get it.
So well. So well. Jen, if I could just comment real quick on those 3 points going backwards. It was during that Be Real send-off, like little tribute, that it dawned on me. Maybe it should have dawned on me during the movie, but it was during that little Be Real thing that I was like, oh, this was never about the MCU. This is them paying tribute to the Fox X-Men characters, putting a nice bow and giving many of those characters what the Outlaws wanted, which was an ending. And the more I reflect on that, the more I like the movie. I mean, retroactively, I feel like there's a movie that you can rewatch so many times because of those types of things. Then the point you make about Wolverine talking to Cassandra Nova about Charles, that is, I think I'm going to have to sort of paraphrase here because I don't know the quote and I don't have it in front of me, but he tells her, if he knew you existed, talking about Charles Xavier, if he knew you existed, he would have torn through the fabric of time to get to you. How accurate is that? I mean, that is, hey, nail, meet hammer, bam, right on the head, right? Is just beautiful. And I have to say, I think that the scene with Laura and Logan by the fire may be my favorite scene of the movie. I haven't really put a ton of thought into that, but I just remember that resonating with me, especially having watched Logan just a few hours before. And Daphne Keene's performance in that movie, and then just being overjoyed that she was included in this movie and that she played such an important part to the character. And then that line delivery of "you were never the right guy until you were," man, that gets me. That just cracks open my little heart and says, here, I'm going to pull on your strings. And so well executed. So I'm so glad you brought up those 3 points. And yeah, it sometimes, and to sort of reference the Green Day stuff, sometimes sappy cliches, they just work and you just got to go with them. Right. And that worked. All of it worked.
And like leaning into, oh, this is cheesy, like is also in the mode of this storytelling and of this movie.
Totally on Deadpool brand. Absolutely.
Right. But it doesn't, but that doesn't mean that it takes away from the impact of it, or that it was like, oh, that's cute. And there's also like, oh, I wonder what the like jokey thing they add in is going to be. And then it's like, no, like the song's enough of a joke. We're really just saying like, look at all these people who are in this and look at the fun they had and like the memories that you have of it. And so again, if you were not there in the theater in 2000 to be like, I can't believe they're making an X-Men movie, does that take away from some level? Are there people who just either weren't there or weren't alive who are like, well, you'll never feel the same way about this as the 3 of us do because we were all there. Like we were there when that happened. We've been here for 24 years, bump it up to 26 if you saw the first Blade movie. Then that's fine. Like you can say that, but like I think that even if you're someone who has only like been vaguely aware of it, if you've come to this later in life, you can still have a connection to that. And I do like those moments as moments that connect. Do they connect mostly because of earlier movies and the accumulation of time with earlier movies? That's possible. I will just add the moment that like I thought was the most effective on an emotional level that might work exclusively contained within this movie is the when Wolverine just rips into Deadpool in the van when he realizes the educated wish, when he realizes, oh, like, wait, you don't actually know that you can fix my world, like you've been lying to me. And he does the whole speech about like, you're the screw up, like you can't even keep a relationship with your we'll use the words with phrase sex worker Logan. Come on, get with the times. Like all these all these things, and just sort of like you're this pathetic person, no one likes you, you're never succeeding anything, blah blah blah. And then there's like this pause. He goes, "Oh, you have nothing to say, mouth," and he just goes, "I'm gonna fight you now." And it's like it is this very different, and like it's funny because it's not the response, but it is sort of like, oh, he is really angry. This is the first time we've seen him really angry, and that was super effective, and that dynamic between the two of them. And then I don't want to get ahead of ourselves in terms of future things, but I think that's my favorite fight of the movie is the two of them in the van. I thought that was a super effective sequence with a bunch of jokes. But I thought that the emotional character stakes of that moment were the most potent just internally within the movie, which again, I don't think is that important. I don't think it's wrong or bad for people to go and see this and enjoy this within the cumulative experience that they've had with all these different movies over the course of their lives. That's all. The end of that point.
So, considering what we've just been talking about, what do we, and that as Colby pointed out, this is a farewell movie to the 20th Century Fox films, much more than it is an MCU movie. So, is there any conclusion that we can draw, anything we can infer about what this movie is trying to say about that? Or like what other than just like, hey, let's remember this good time that we had? You know what I mean? Like, is there anything else? Like, if you were to say what the thesis of this movie is in looking back at all these characters, like what do you think it would be?
Oh, Jen, you're making me go into school mode and I'm on summer break. You're making me
Sorry, I
find
didn't want to use the
thesis.
T word. It just came out.
Oh, thesis. I didn't consider Is there a thesis in a Deadpool and Wolverine movie? You asked me that question.
You come here on a summer, a hot summer day, and ask for a thesis.
Oof. So, friendship cures all things. You don't die alone. That's the thesis. I will say, I don't know that I would have to think more about the thesis just because I'm sort of obsessed with having to find and write good theses right now in my life. But I will reference that little tribute again. And I think nostalgia cures all wounds, right? Nostalgia forgives all sins, right? The people that I feel like the Fox characters, and I was probably one of these, the Fox characters, the X-Men characters that in these Fox movies, I know there was a lot of exception taken with some of their treatment. And I didn't really understand it until I actually watched that X-Men 97 animated show, which I had never watched the X-Men animated show from the 90s. I didn't watch it, but I watched 97. And that was absolutely mind-blowing. It was just bonkers how good that show was. And I started to understand. My sister-in-law is a huge Rogue fan. And she was always very angry with how Rogue was portrayed in the X-Men movies. You can probably say that for Storm fans. They probably had some issues with that character. And then the list goes on. And then you can even debate the effectiveness of the films. But it makes me sort of think of the prequel movies in Star Wars. The generation that grew up watching those movies are now the voice and the defenders and the let's get out there and champion these movies in the world now. I don't know that that's happening as much with the 20th Century Fox X-Men movies, but this movie can definitely rally like, hey, 20th Century Fox Hive, let's rise up, right? There is a lot here. And I sort of had all that come to me as I was watching that tribute video because we weren't looking at the characters in that video. We were looking at the actors behind the scenes, in between takes. And it's like a wonderful reminder that these are all human beings. These are all people that are doing their jobs to the best of their abilities, maybe some more than others. And I felt like not only did that little tribute, but this film as a whole reminds us like this was a 25-year caption of movie history and Marvel history. And we want to do it justice and we want to bring some joy and some honor to that. So if there's a thesis, and if you can make this a thesis, this is a movie that we're going to highlight the potential of these characters so that you can now see, maybe bringing it forward, the so what we can really do in future storytelling.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. Because I do think it's sort of a caustic love letter to these earlier movies. It's like, it's comfortable making fun of them while also being like, but like having true affection for them, and also sort of there's just like there's a degree of playing around with like what it means to adapt these stories, and so like it's in a way weird. Like I am, and I think we all are old enough to remember people being mad that Hugh Jackman was cast as Logan or Wolverine because he was too tall and he was not Canadian, and so people were like, "It doesn't fit the character. This isn't real." I think I mentioned this on mic. I really wanted to say it. I was saying it out loud while I was listening to Jen and Greg on the retrospective, that I have a friend who watched the first X-Men movie and he was mad that Pyro was older than Iceman and has never watched another one of these movies because he's like, well, Iceman is one of the original X-Men, and it's like, sure, but they adapted it, they made it different. He's like, well, that's not the way it is. And so I think that it's taking and while also gently ribbing the way the multiverse has been attempted to be used in recent movies, in recent Marvel movies, but using that as an opportunity to be like, well, all these different things. There's all these different ways that things can be interpreted in the way these stories can be told. I really don't think beyond like, isn't this funny, and isn't this like, isn't this a blast to have these two people together finally, Deadpool and Wolverine? I don't know if I can really claim there's an intentional thesis. I would say possible inadvertent thesis is that things can matter when you make them matter. And so like these, like you can choose to be like, I want to save these people. I want to like, or I want to save this world. I want to save this timeline, or I want to be, connected with this other person. If you're choosing to do that, and you could also, have not chosen to do that. And similar, it's that like, we can choose to be like, well, none of those movies are canon anymore, so I don't need to pay attention to any of that. I don't need to know about Patrick Stewart or Ian McKellen in these movies. You could be like, yeah, but like those movies were fun, and some people have a lot of memories with them, so you can choose to have those matter. They can be important to you if you choose to have that be the case. And I don't know that I haven't thought beyond that, but maybe that's it. I just thought of that while Colby was talking, so I don't know if there's really deeper things to that. But I think the sort of someone learning to sacrifice themselves, like these two characters learning to be like, I'm going to give myself up to do this, and that's also what saves them in the end, is that they both choose to sacrifice at the same time. That's sort of choosing to put yourself out there because you care.
Yeah, I think, and again, I'm formulating my answer to this question in real time as I'm listening to both of you, but I feel like that moment when Deadpool turns back and says, "You were the best, Wolverine," I think is the key to unlocking the thesis of this movie. Both because I think its thesis has to work because it's a Deadpool breaking the fourth wall, sending up this period in movie history piece. Like the thesis has to be working on two levels, right? It has to be working in the story with these particular characters, but it also has to be working in terms of the meta commentary about like, what have we all been doing for the past 25 years with these things, right? And I think by having the story really focus on quote unquote the worst Wolverine, the reject Wolverine, and therefore all these other characters that end up in the void that are rejects, it's sort of like saying, you know what, like, it's okay if you screw up all the time. It's okay if some of these movies are horrible. I'm looking at you, X-Men Origins Wolverine. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's okay if not all of these were flawless. It's okay if we screwed up. It's okay if we weren't our best. It's okay if people are calling us the worst Wolverine, right? Out of that amazing montage, which hopefully we'll talk about more later. But that's okay. That's okay, and that you can still kind of find value in that. You can sort of still like you can still be the hero even if you screw up a bunch, right? Like there's still value in that project. And I feel like that works both on the level of these two particular characters, right? The Deadpool is like gotten rejected from X-Men and Avengers, like nobody wants him. This Wolverine is the one that failed and everyone keeps calling him the worst Wolverine. But by sort of confronting that past, they're able to move on and rise above it somehow. So yeah, I don't know. That's all I've got. Like, it feels like it has something to do with that. It's like we're acknowledging that we're screw ups.
CPT, that's why she's the host of the show. Because she can find the best thesis.
Yeah.
That's why I always like going last.
I really hope one of the like 6 people credited with writing this movie could listen to that segment, so they could be like, yeah, that's what we were thinking when we made exactly all those jokes.
Actually, that I love that point, and to be quite honest, this is why I want to rewatch the movie a few times. I had forgotten about that line about "you are the best Wolverine" and how it fits into the whole storyline of him being the worst Wolverine over and over and over again, and that just goes to further my idea. The thing that I love most about this not only being a tribute to these characters, but also what not only does Wolverine and Deadpool as characters what they mean to each other, but really you can extend that to the actors too, because how much of this movie's charm comes from the witty banter on the internet back and forth between Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman over the years. So they found a way to bring that into the story in a meta way, and I think it made it even more special. So I'm going to sign off on your thesis, and I also would like to have a request. You can make this a new part of the Long Take Review. Make everybody find the thesis of whatever you're talking about. And then I even have the soundbite ready for you. You remember when Partagaz in Andor, when he so self-righteously looks over and says, "Thesis, please." You can be that can be the soundbite. That could be our
sound clip.
Nice.
Yeah, and then everybody can go through and do the thesis. So
this is incredible. This is on brand. We may lose listeners as a result, but I don't care. And then, so the other thing that I forgot to mention earlier that you reminded me of is that the line "you were the best Wolverine" 100% is Ryan Reynolds saying that to Hugh Jackman, because we know inevitably maybe we really hold off and it's like 10 years from now, but there is going to be another actor at some point playing Wolverine, right?
Maybe he was already in this movie. We don't know.
Oh geez.
There was a lot of
do you mean
there was
Henry
a lot
Cavill?
of cameos.
Yeah.
No.
He looked great. He looked really great.
I mean, he did.
They need to work on the hair.
He's
they need
even
to work
taller.
on the hair. I think
he's even taller than Hugh Jackman, I think. So the people who are mad about the height
are going to be even madder.
Yeah.
I love how if you go back to the episode with Greg, I think he and I both were like, yeah, like Hugh Jackman's short. No, Hugh Jackman is like 6'10". Like it's like
well, I think he's like 6'2" or 6'3". I don't think he's 6'10".
Okay. But like still, like it's like he's a tall person.
That was one
he
of
just is really good at hunching over to make him look like he's small and wiry, I guess.
That was one of the big arguments that the fanboys were complaining about, was that he wasn't stocky enough. That Wolverine is short and stocky, and he is sort of tall and lean. But boy, he made it work. So, they were wrong.
And we see here you don't really want that. Right?
It's true.
We see the height accurate Wolverine, and they're like, get out of here. It's like in that episode of Rick and Morty where they go to the planet where everything's a cob, and they're just like, we gotta go, and they're like, why? Everything's a cob.
It's all a cob.
That's the energy they brought to that scene where they were like, we just gotta go. We can't stay for this. Like
something that should not become a recurring segment on the show is like, what are dark corners of the internet saying about this latest piece of mainstream pop culture? And I stumbled into some subreddit that's for short men who think they are the most prejudiced against segment of the population, to a like degree that it's like they're in a bad place. They're in a bad they're men's rights incel adjacent, if not like fully in there. And they are this proves that everyone hates us. and that we're the most maligned group because like it's just a joke, and everyone laughed as soon as they saw that he was short. And then other people were like, well, I think it's a thing because it's supposed to be that Wolverine's short. Like, they're mocking us. We have one hero who's short and they're mocking it. So on behalf of them, I say it was hilarious that Wolverine was really short. And they also made it so like his head and shoulders were the same, but that is just he had a smaller body, and it was really funny because it's
right.
like,
They also made him disproportional. Like that was I think that was the other thing too, is that they're definitely playing. The version of him was not just short; it was like played up to be like weird.
Yeah.
So
I did see someone comment, especially that sequence. Someone was like, oh, this movie is essentially Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, but with Ryan Reynolds as the auteur instead of Sam Raimi. So instead of there being Sam Raimi flourishes to everything, it's just Ryan Reynolds like patter. And like structurally, maybe that's true. And going back to the earlier discussion of like, does this movie stand up, is like, what did people think about that Doctor Strange movie? A lot of folks sort of pushed back on it as not really working, but like maybe this one works better just because it's funny.
The main thing I would argue against that is that in thinking specifically of the multiversal characters, the old characters that come back, the way that they are treated in this movie is with so much more care than in Multiverse of Madness. Because Multiverse of Madness is like they pop in, they're sitting in all these chairs, right? And they like Illuminati chairs or whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they're dead, and it's like a horror thing, right? Whereas I know this brings you great joy, but like
I did like that part.
I was mad
on the outside. Yeah, I know.
And whereas this, it's like, yes, the group of characters, right, whose names we haven't said, Elektra, Blade, oh my gosh, and
Gambit. John Bankert, aka Gambit.
Yeah, I know. I meant to send you pictures. I found the pictures of us in our costumes, like when we are babies, when we are baby faced, like Wolverine is in the first X-Men movie. But yeah, so when that group of characters, the ones that we meet in the void, who are like, we're thrown away here, but we want our ending, right? I do feel like the movie cares about them and what happens to them, even though they still die, in a way that like there's kind of like a detachment in Multiverse of Madness where it's so unceremonial, I guess, when they die. I don't know. That's my thought.
I think it's so ironic to sort of draw the parallels between Multiverse of Madness and this. And I know this is sort of in our agenda, so multiverse story, how effective, right? Multiverse of Madness to me seems like it tried to be so consequential. Like so much of this is going to matter. And this movie is completely inconsequential in that regard. And this is so much more effective, in my opinion. This may be the best multiverse movie that I've seen behind Everything Everywhere All at Once, in my opinion, because it makes you suspend your brain and be like, don't worry, it's going to take place in the multiverse, but you don't try to follow it. And that's the road that I started to get a little bit detoured on after the happy scene, because I was confused by that scene, to be quite honest. I haven't been unconfused about it yet, but I just left it there. And I'm like, I have questions about this, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. I'm just going to keep moving forward, which is what the characters were doing and the story was doing. But how ironic is that in an inconsequential movie, to the MCU, I should say, is the inconsequentialness of it, that these characters, they treated them with such reverence and respect when the rest of the world and even their own franchises stopped doing that a long time ago, right? They wanted their ending. They wanted their time to shine. They wanted their moment, and they got all that, right? And then what I'm so happy about is that X-23 made it out of that and is now in play going forward. Where the rest of them, I don't need to see Channing Tatum as Gambit anymore. I got what I needed out of that, and that was amazing.
Yeah, I want to see more Gambit. I don't know if I
Channing Tatum Gambit.
Channing Tatum seriously as Gambit in a serious movie and not a comedy. Like, he was very good. They did seem like they were trying really, really hard to respond to the people who say that Gambit's power set is lame. I'm not one of those people, but they were trying so hard to make him cool in terms of being like, look how powerful he is, and look, he's got the cards, and he's got the, but I don't know. Maybe
Well, and then
Channing Tatum would do a different accent if he were in a serious.
I think the other thing that they were
movie.
leaning into that was so good was, I remember when all that was going down, because that was when I was sort of at my peak of give me more information about everything that's happening. When people heard that these movies could be developed with Channing Tatum as Gambit, the number one thing was, how is he going to pull off the accent? There's no way. And then they made like a 5-minute joke out of that. And I just ate it up because I just remember that was the number one complaint. He can't talk like Gambit. He's never going to pull. And then they even said, what was it?
Funny.
Who's your dialect coach? The Minions. Oh my goodness. So good. That was amazing.
I agree that was amazing. And it's maybe the representative thing in my mind for like how many layers of jokes and that require all this advanced knowledge or previous knowledge, I guess I should say, going into the movie for that to be funny. Like maybe it is just funny that it's Channing Tatum and he's speaking with a thick Cajun accent. And if you don't know anything beyond that, you're just like, oh, that's funny. And then Deadpool's making fun of how you can't understand what he's saying. That's fun. But if you knew, like Colby, what you're saying, which I also remember, which is that like, how is he going to do the accent? Like, why don't they have someone else? And that like the movie started and stopped. It was going to happen, not going to happen. And then it was like, well, we're going to wait. And then suddenly Disney was buying Fox, and it's like, we're not even going to do anymore of these X-Men movies. So forget it. And so it all just sort of faded away. And then with that were all the jokes of like, some of us were just born in the void. Like some of us basically never had a world that existed, like was baked into like what he was describing. And he gets a couple references to that. And it's just like, oh, that's good. This is really funny, like on all of those levels, but also I think maybe it could just be enjoyed on a basic like haha man talk funny way. But like to your point, like, at the end they Deadpool asks the lady whose name I don't remember from Loki, who's now a judge, it seems, in the TVA, to like, can you go and save our friends who helped us get out of the void? And she's like, I'll see what I can do. And they do save X-23. So they could theoretically have saved all of them, depending on if they want to bring these people back in another movie. And we do have, I don't want to get ahead to like favorite jokes, because I don't have this as my favorite, but I do think it's worth mentioning Blade being like, there's only one Blade and there's only ever going to be one Blade, from Wesley Snipes, which was certainly written to be one joke and has become a different joke as the Mahershala Ali Blade movie seems to never get off the ground because they can't get it running. That like, what if Wesley Snipes is just Blade forever and they do bring him back if there's ever going to be another Blade movie?
To me, that was written very deliberately as a reference to the tumultuous development of the new Mahershala Ali.
Oh, I took
movies.
I took it as written
to be like,
as,
yeah, those are never going to happen. No one thinks those are going to happen. So there will only ever be one. Or the irony of like poor Wesley Snipes is like, yeah, I'm the guy, right? And it's like, well,
yeah, it's like no one told Wesley Snipes there's going to be another. I took it as no one told Wesley Snipes they're doing another Blade movie with
another one. Oh, okay,
who is a much more accomplished actor than he is, and that was supposed to be the joke. But then,
two-time Oscar winner Mahershala Ali.
I mean, he already
also
existed.
Cottonmouth in the Luke Cage series.
Exactly.
Oh, that's right. Speaking of actors who are allowed to play more than one character in the
yeah.
all right, I think we've already started celebrating our faves, so let's get into it.
Sorry, Jen, before we do that, should we talk briefly about the time you mentioned not understanding the timeline?
I know.
We did as well. I mean,
only if you can explain it to us, because
I can explain because I did look into this because I was confused as well.
Oh,
so I looked
great, yes.
So I looked into that timeline thing that Colby you mentioned earlier, and for listeners who can't obviously see our Google Doc, Jen also mentioned it. I did watch one of the hour and 10-minute long YouTube videos, the new Rockstars one.
Can I set you up by explaining sort of like because Colby sort of shared his experience of like, so I know that Earth 616 is the MCU.
Yes.
But then there were a bunch of other numbers that kept popping up where I was like, I guess that's the thing. I don't know. And then that's what caused me to kind of lose track of like, wait, so like does Deadpool have to, because he's not at the TVA when he's talking to Happy. So if he's, you know what I mean? Like, how does he get from one to the other kind of?
So the short answer is no one really knows, and we should stop asking these questions. The longer answer is that there's basically, which I think helps in terms of understanding the whole movie, because I was also a little confused, is that there are only two Earths that matter like significantly in this movie, and it's Earth 616 is the MCU, our standard timeline, and then Earth 10005, I believe, that's the Deadpool X-Men Fox movie universe. And before, it was not 100% clear, I guess, to fans who are really obsessively tracking this, if the Deadpool universe was actually the same as the X-Men movie universe, because when Deadpool in the 20-teens is talking to Colossus, it's the Days of Future Past Apocalypse cast that is like does the cameo behind the scenes, which is technically supposed to be from like the late 80s, early 90s. And it should have been Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, et cetera, et cetera. It should have been the older people if he's in the 20-teens. So that is then explained by maybe Days of Future Past changed everything and they never become Patrick Stewart. They always just stay as these actors as they, whatever. So again, none of this matters. We shouldn't be thinking about it. But that's the universe that we're in for most of the movie. The theory, which is not confirmed in any way, is that at the end of Deadpool 2, mid or post credits, when he gets Cable's time thing and he saves his girlfriend Vanessa, and then he does all the other jumping around, which includes killing the Wade Wilson / Deadpool version from Origins that has sewn the mouth shut, and then killing Ryan Reynolds so he isn't in Green Lantern. That those are all, like, when he does the Cable time jumping, that creates different, he can go to different universes as well. It's not just time travel, it's multiverse traversing. And so he is able to go to the MCU universe and on somehow is aware that like that's where the real good true Avengers are. And so he jumps in there when he's doing all of those jumps before he destroys the Cable, which I think he says they destroyed the Cable device. And then he's just like, but what if I go here and I can like come here and join the Avengers, and that will be impressive to my girlfriend, who, for reasons that literally make no sense, she suddenly is mad that I'm not doing enough hero stuff because she almost died and then came back to life. So that's, he does that and he goes to that universe, and Happy is like, no, like, no thanks. And then he goes back to his home universe, destroys the device, leaves heroing Christian Bale, Bruce Wayne style, and gets a job at a car dealership.
Yeah. And they do make a reference to Deadpool 2 because he does bring up at the TVA, like, oh, am I in trouble because of the stuff I did with Cables, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I assume. Like, I sort of assumed a less precise version of what you just said. I was like, oh, it must be something, because I failed to do, as if you listen to the other episode, I failed to do my rewatch homework for that episode. So I never actually got to rewatch Deadpool 2. Sorry to confess that. I did my best to fake it with Greg. You heard it here, folks. I didn't actually watch Deadpool 2 in preparation for that last episode. I just was trying to read the Wikipedia page. But basically, I was like, oh, it must be because I don't remember what happened to Deadpool. That's sort of why I hand waved it. I was like, okay, it must be something about what happens in Deadpool 2 that I don't remember. So it sounds like it was great, mostly.
I had watched Deadpool and Deadpool 2 maybe about 6 weeks ago and had already forgotten that he went back and saved everybody. I had to be reminded from a coworker of that. So that's also one of the reasons why I was confused. And PT, your explanation, all of them, my favorite one being "don't worry about it," is that's my way of going about things. But the more nuanced explanation also is very satisfying. And I do remember them circling around the whole Cable time travel thing, and that when I was discussing with Luke, that was his just sort of snap decision. Was like, well, they referenced the Cable stuff, but I don't know if that would have mattered, but it seems to have been, because if he would have gone backwards and then there's more timelines springing off of those decisions, it now works in my multiverse brain. So,
and I mean, the saddest part of this explanation for me is that doesn't mean that Cable saved his wife and daughter in Deadpool 2. It means that he saved a different version of his wife and daughter. And there's just like a series of dead, charred wife and daughter of Cables that exist in the multiverse, Rick and Morty style. But he just has like a version that will exist. And, I guess that was good enough for Cable.
Can I just correct the record here real quick? I think I did list Deadpool Wolverine as the second best multiverse movie. I may put it behind the Spider-Verse movies. They were phenomenal. So I had to go on record and say I didn't forget about the Spider-Verse movies.
I was assuming you were just counting live action movies and not
live action animation. It doesn't mean anything to me. It's all the same.
I was quietly holding it against you.
I was thinking when I was watching the 100 Deadpool fight. And again, we're really just spoiling this list of favorites thing that's coming up in a second. But I was like, oh, this is the Deadpool version of Across the Spider-Verse. Like the final fight in Across the Spider-Verse, where it's like, oh, look how many fun, crazy, zany Spider-Men we can come up with. And this is the same thing, but for Deadpool. Which is funny because like I think right after that fight, main Deadpool Prime is like, you know what, this multiverse thing, it's really not working. And I'm like, but you just referenced the one that does work. So like, and is good. So, maybe that was supposed to be ironic and purposeful. All right. I want to hear what your favorites are. So we got to get into it. So I'm lumping both characters together. You can do either or both. Favorite version, speaking of the 100 Deadpools, favorite variant of Wolverine and Deadpool in the movie.
So specifically we're talking about the montage where he's going to look for Wolverines. So all those different Wolverines.
Yeah.
I have to tell you that happened at the beginning of the movie and a lot of things happened afterwards. So I will only tell you my favorite will be the one I remember. And that's the cavalry. I thought that was absolutely right. 100% best way that they could have handled that, because just the conversation about Henry Cavill, and I'm a fan of Henry Cavill. I love what he does. And I actually am sort of a minor fan of the Superman movies. I know there's a lot of divisiveness around that, but he was not. I thought he was a magnificent Superman. And to see him, I don't know what they were doing with that hair. I don't know what that was about. I mentioned it. They need to fix that. But just to get to see him sort of as a real big wink and a nod, I think that was my favorite. And the Deadpool, I could put this in either my favorite version of Deadpool or my favorite cameo. I'm going to go with this one, and the favorite version of Deadpool was Nice Pool. And it's for one reason and one reason only. When he looked at the camera and said, "The proposal." Absolute riot. I absolutely lost it. I was cackling I love The Proposal. I love that movie. So good. And his absolute fumble of fourth wall breaking was so perfect. And for that, he was my favorite version besides the original.
Yeah. And when Deadpool Prime is like, is that what you think I do? Like, so funny. So funny.
That line hit so hard in my theater. I didn't know that original Deadpool said, "Is that what you think I do?" until I was reading about the movie at home, because the laughter was covering up the next line.
Oh wow. That's amazing.
That really landed for me and for everyone in my theater. I agree. That was almost my introduction quote. When Jen asked how I was doing, I almost just said but I was worried that was too much of again, it's not really a spoiler, but I don't know. I didn't think it fit, so I didn't do it. But yeah, I also love that. Wow. I'm going to say, I think the Henry Cavill cameo was probably my favorite variant of Wolverine, and I already made fun of short people, so I don't want to bring up the short Wolverine again. So I will say Patch, which is the sort of James Bond tuxedo version of Wolverine with the eye patch. That was just a cool look, and it was Hugh Jackman looked great, and it was just I could see. Really, it was I could see a movie, just different movies. They just wanted to be here's a one-shot Wolverine movie, in 1998. Boom, here, this. We're gonna just tell this one. We're going to use this Wolverine in a movie. That was the one that was the most I definitely would want to see that. That would look really cool.
So that is not saying this will be Hugh Jackman when this happens, but because that version of Wolverine is so tied to Madripoor. If the MCU decides to dredge up things that they've teased in the past, that is actually one of the more likely ones that I think that we're going to end up getting. Again, that's a lot of ifs. But I feel like they were like, hey, Madripoor, especially there's one of the Disney Plus series. I think it's Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Yeah.
They go to Madripoor.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a lot of talk about Madripoor in the MCU broadly. So
I was going to admit I don't know what Madripoor is, but now that you said that, I did watch Falcon and Winter Soldier, so I think I know.
It's supposed to be like this like seedy underbelly kind of city.
It was where all the like you could go to find like hackers and stuff. Like there were people that were doing shady business. Okay,
people are on
the Mos Eisley of the
or the place that Obi-Wan goes to find Leia. The sort of cyberpunk world in the Kenobi show. Yeah. To make a much more esoteric Star Wars reference for some reason instead of the prominent one that's in like half of the movies and TV shows.
Yeah, let's get. Now you're making me think. I want the Star Wars version of this movie with like the deep cuts and references and
that's the Lego Star Wars specials. If you haven't watched those, there's a couple of Lego Star Wars ones that basically do this, where they jump around and they have like the Alden Ehrenreich Han Solo.
The Christmas one is with Rey is really good.
The Alden Ehrenreich Han Solo pops into Return of the Jedi for like a second, and like Vader can face Maul, and so it's all it's more kid friendly, which for Star Wars obviously makes more sense. But yeah, it's very similar for the people who are Star Wars nerds. It's not like obviously quite at the same level of production and actors and all that, but yeah, the Christmas Lego special. I think the Halloween one too is a similar thing of jumping around to different eras and different places. Okay. This is great. I was stalling to figure out my favorite Deadpool. I don't know. I feel bad taking this because I kind of think it might be Jen's choice, but I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to say Dogpool because that ugly dog was absolutely adorable. And just every, they leaned into it. It was very obvious they were going to do it. Every slow-mo run with that tongue hanging out, but it worked every time. And our regular Deadpool, like immediately falling in love with him and trying to scam a way to keep him and ultimately getting to do so. All that was great. So I'm going to save some of my other favorite Deadpools for the cameos and maybe even some of the lines. But that's what I'm going to say for favorite Deadpool. Jen, how about you?
I loved the Dogpool B plot of like, and especially when Wolverine was like, or murder, like he's like, you just murdered Nicepool to steal his dog. Like, let's say that out loud, please. It's so funny.
Also, shout out to another Nicepool line that you just referenced after when he's just being used as a human shield, and then he looks at him and goes, how quickly can you regenerate? And he just looks back with the most earnestness you can possibly muster and be like, regenerate? What is this? Just dead.
But also it makes sense. That's why he's not scarred, because he didn't go through the process. So he didn't get to that point in his life.
Okay, so my turn. So, I mean, I loved the entire Wolverine montage, but the one that I felt like, I've read comics with that costume is the brown Wolverine costume, which is I think was originally designed by John Byrne. I felt that was my moment of like, hey, I've been rewarded for reading some comics. Moment for me.
That's the OG Wolverine uniform, right? Like from when the character was first introduced, I believe.
I think so, but or at the very least, it's very old. It's a very old design, but
that got. I mean, again, I had an industry skewing audience, but that got a pop in just seeing that costume. People were excited in the theater, in the staid Alamo Theater.
Okay, my favorite Deadpool. I mean, I really like the Wrexham Deadpool. Did you notice this? It had the Welsh flag.
I mean, you're taking my favorite cameo. It's Paul Mullen. That's Paul Mullen the Wrexham outfit, the striker from Wrexham. I was saving him for the cameo, but yeah.
All right, can you explain who Paul Mullen is for the listeners who have not seen Welcome to Wrexham?
Paul Mullen was I think the first big signing, if not the first, he was certainly seemed like the most prominent signing for the Wrexham team from the aforementioned Welcome to Wrexham documentary that was signed once Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney had purchased the team. And there's a degree of like, if they were not the main story of the documentary, it's fun when they check in with other fan bases. But I do understand other fan bases are like, so these rich people just came in and started spending way more money than my team can, and then you guys got successful. Like, that's no fun. But Paul Mullen was like playing 2 levels, I think, above them in the league table, maybe even 3. And so he was like a big time player to sign and to agree to come down to a lower level, the promotion relegation in the Football Association in the UK. So you kind of you have to take, like, you can take, he didn't take less money, but he took less prominence because he's in the smaller team. But he's in this documentary. He's one of the main people they talk to all the time. He scores a ton of goals for them. He's super prominent. He had a couple very moving stories about his family and his young son, and also his own health over the course of the last few years. So he's seems to be a really nice guy, comes across really well. And so he's one of the star players of the Wrexham team. And Wrexham is in Wales. The Welsh flag is a big dragon. So he's the Deadpool that has the Welsh dragon on the front of the outfit. I think he has one line where he just says something really, really small. And that is Paul Mullen, the striker, aka Welsh Pool.
Colby, did you have a favorite? What's your favorite cameo?
I'm so glad you asked me this right now, because he hasn't been brought up and he wasn't going to be on my list, but we've talked about all the ones that were on my list. So I'm saying Johnny Storm, absolutely 100%.
Yeah.
Perfect
Incredible.
Execution. I just love how that whole scene was framed. I totally went to Steve Rogers first, and I was like, in my mind, I didn't say this out loud, so I didn't reveal myself as an idiot that much. I said, oh, we're getting Steve Rogers finally in phase whatever. And then as it played out, I'm like, oh no, they tricked me and it worked, and I love that I was tricked, and he's gonna say flame on, and he did, and that was amazing. Just the whole thing, that how it turned out all the way through when he became a bag of organs on the dirt.
That was very realistic, might not be the right word, but it was very graphic.
It was visceral.
So icky.
Is what I will say.
So icky.
It was gross.
Did the two of you stay to the end of the credits and watch the final?
Yes, yeah, and that absolutely included in the cameo.
Yeah, and I was very glad for that. I also I will admit, it's been a very long time since I've watched either of those Fantastic Four movies. Probably since the second one.
None of them are good, so you're fine.
They're not good, no. But does Johnny Storm in those movies have a noticeable Boston accent, or was it just Chris Evans putting a Boston accent into this Johnny Storm in the multiverse? But that post-credits rant where he is revealed to have said all the things that Deadpool quoted him as saying just got more and more Boston as each line came out.
Yes,
and
he really
that was incredible. That really elevated it for me.
He really did feel like a Patriots fan when someone says something bad about Tom Brady. Like that's the energy he brought to that, and I love it. I assumed yes, but now you're making me question whether or not that's true. It could just be Chris Evans being like, I'm from Boston, so I'm going to just...
Yeah, this is the Boston variant of Johnny Storm.
I also love the fact that they gave him the opportunity to be the most opposite of Steve Rogers that he possibly could be. Because, I mean, he's even calling out, Captain America, Steve Rogers in Age of Ultron, he's calling out his teammates about language. And this gave, the same actor who just spent his entire last 10, 15 years being the clean cut, wouldn't say bleep if he stepped in it, and just a 2-minute long expletive-filled rant.
The delivery of it was perfect.
It had to be so satisfying for Chris Evans, right? Just to be able to go on. I'm in a Marvel movie and I'm dropping so many, expletives. No one will ever expect this. It was so good.
I feel like it has to be maybe in line for the best post-credits Marvel scene ever, because it actually completely recontextualizes the movie you just watched, or at least part of it, right? Like, because it actually changes your perspective on, oh wait, Deadpool wasn't throwing him under the bus, right? He actually said those things. And the fact that it ends with, and you can quote me on it.
So good.
Perfect, because he did.
I will push back gently on, he did still throw him under the bus. He didn't need to quote him on it to the evil bad person. But yes, he didn't
he didn't make it up.
He didn't invent, he didn't put words into his mouth. I just want to agree with what Colby was saying in terms of the execution. I remember multiple times over the course, again, not like tracking it super closely, but just people being like, there's the new Deadpool, it's gonna be Deadpool and Wolverine, this is what's happening. Seeing people say, if they're gonna do cameos from the old movies, they should bring Chris Evans back, but they should have him be Johnny Storm instead of Steve Rogers. And I was like, oh, that's really funny. They should do that. Like multiple times driving to the movie, I was like, well, Chris Evans was already in these Fox movies. He was a different character before he was Captain America. And I still thought it was Captain America when he showed up in the movie. I still totally it just went away from my memory. So I was just like, oh yeah, he's going to be Captain America until he swears. And then it's like, oh, they got me. Like they got me so good, even though I was thinking about it actively.
For me, there's a close up on his arm to show, like, to focus in on his costume that he's wearing under the cloak. Mm-hmm. And that's when I was like, they're doing it. Because I'm like, why else would they be doing that if they're not going to be like, are you sure you know who this is?
Right.
Let us sneak peek into his costume. Right. And also props to Greg, because he 100% called this cameo on our preview episode. It was like, he's like, wouldn't it be great? And he explains exactly, minus the you can quote me on it aspect of it. Like, he really.
Right.
He's just too smart, that Cass guy. He's just too smart.
Yeah.
And I know the shot that you're talking about, and that completely turned my brain towards Captain America, because I thought I saw red, and I don't know if that was there. It was just my brain, but I thought I saw enough red, white, and blue in there to be like, oh, what? And that just made the actual reveal even more fun for me.
I will say, this is not my answer to the cameo question, but because I did watch the hour plus New Rockstar's breakdown of all the Easter eggs, that when they're being taken as prisoners, and it's Deadpool and Wolverine and Chris Evans as Johnny Storm, they're in like a ball prison, like a ball-shaped cage. That there's some long shots where there is another cage next to it. And the speculation is that was the character that Rob McElhenney filmed as, because he filmed as a TVA, one of the TVA agents or officers. And they had a whole little like sequence of him also being sucked into the void during all of this. And he would be taken prisoner and he'd be in the ball cage next to their ball cage, but he didn't make it. So that was the second Wrexham, Welcome to Wrexham connection, is that he was supposed to be in the movie.
Amazing. So I guess we're down to my favorite cameo. I mean, this might also, can I move to combine this with favorite joke, and that will segue us into talking about favorite joke. So my favorite cameo is Jennifer Garner, which I would not have guessed that would be my favorite. But first of all, she looked incredible and was completely believable as like she hasn't missed a beat. And managed to make me forget all about the original Elektra movie and just be like, wait, Jennifer Garner as Elektra, like why did we squander this opportunity? But my favorite joke, and this is partly why it's my favorite cameo, again, it's the like extra discursive layers of like, you needed to know that Jennifer Garner was married to Ben Affleck, who played Daredevil at the same time she was Elektra. And so when she's reporting that Daredevil was one of the ones who died already, and Deadpool's like, oh, I'm so sorry. She's like, it's fine.
It's just a dismissive line, like, he's dead.
He's dead.
It's really actually good.
Single best line delivery in the movie. This is my top joke. I'll give you a backup one, but yeah, this was incredible. And again, like hit just so well. I don't know what was said for the next couple of lines in that scene because the theater was losing it for this one. So even though in that moment I still was like, I think we see Ben Affleck as Daredevil. I did think he was still going to pop up at some point, because she made that joke, which would then be funny. We had a Henry Cavill and Ben Affleck MCU movie, but that was so good. And like, it's not a joke, or it's not funny, or you don't have to even know who Elektra and Daredevil are, let alone know who Jennifer Garner and Ben Affleck are. I believe they met in the Daredevil movie, and then they got married. So you have that whole history. It's really funny. If not, it's just like, it's fun. Like maybe it's funny that she's dismissive of someone dying, but yeah, it's if you're on this wavelength, if you're ready to have fun with that kind of thing, that was really funny. I will go, I guess, a similar sort of real world reference thing to when I think it's when they meet Nice Pool, is when our regular Deadpool says about Wolverine is like he usually has his shirt off, but he's let himself go since the divorce. Which incredible.
Yes.
Like, and the kind of thing you're glad Hugh Jackman signed off on it, but like he let the joke be made because that did not happen that long ago. And that was
No, that's pretty fresh.
Yeah, that was pretty.
And in fact, I'd argue
solid.
the opposite has happened, right? Like he got divorced, and now I feel like maybe we don't even get this movie if he has not finished his divorce.
That's possible, and it did set up the wonderful reveal of how ripped he was when his shirt does come off at the end of the movie, and multiple other characters are just staring.
Yeah.
I have to pick my favorite joke now.
Yes.
So hard. This is very difficult. I'm going to just glob in many of the jokes from the first trailer. I thought were very funny. Like the whole Kevin Feige is not allowing us to do the cocaine thing.
Mm-hmm.
Very funny. Well, then, and that turned into sort of like a running cocaine joke throughout the movie. And I'm not usually a fan of cocaine jokes, but for some reason that made me laugh. There's the whole like, PG-13, the whole, I mean, just Ryan Reynolds delivering things is just put the list under that. That's the header, right? But when he looks at the, TVA shows up and pulls him out of his apartment and they have their pruning sticks and the pegging joke basically is so funny that I just cracked up from the beginning. But honestly, and I'm at the risk of being redundant, I'm going to go backwards a little bit because this was literally my favorite joke in the movie. And it was when Logan looked at Deadpool and said, "You are just God's perfect idiot, aren't you?" I don't know what it is about that line or his delivery or just how perfect it sort of fits into the scene and the whole meta commentary beyond this movie. I could see Hugh Jackman saying that to Ryan Reynolds on the set, like in a genuine moment of friendship. And it just literally made me cackle. I just thought it was so funny. And again, why I was so happy that I got to say it at the beginning of this episode. So I'm going to go with that. I just thought it was very, very funny. But I mean, this is a 2-hour joke. This is a movie that it comes so quick and they work so well. But yeah, I'm gonna plant my flag on that one.
It's a good one. It's a really good one. All right, so I think what's up next is let's do favorite fight scene.
Well,
unless PT wanted to do the other one.
Wait, what was the other one?
More surprising cameo.
I mean, I feel like
we've talked about cameos enough.
I feel like we talked about that. I mean, for me, I would say it's Wesley Snipes. I didn't think he would show up for this.
Yeah,
I did.
Yeah, I'm gonna use a term that you guys use a lot. I'm gonna co-sign that one because I did not expect that whatsoever.
Yeah, I will. I mean, only because I already said it, so I'm gonna reclaim it. That my favorite fight scene was the one in the minivan between the Deadpool and Wolverine. I just thought that was the most interesting, especially when they actively hype up the like you've been waiting for this for 20 years when it's the fight in front of the broken 20th Century Fox logo in the void, which incredible. And so they that fight is great, like whatever, that's fine, but then to have one that actually had like stakes, like it felt like, oh, they are actually mad at each other right now for fair character based reasons that I'm pretty locked into that, and then the choreography within the van. And then I will say I missed, because I don't really know the song, but I missed that was where the Greatest Showman music was, when Wolverine is pounding Deadpool's head into the radio. The first song that comes on is whatever the opening number is from Greatest Showman, which I saw was on the soundtrack and I didn't know when it was coming in, so I guess that's where it shows up. But yeah, that was really good. And I had clocked the Coexist bumper sticker when they first got in the minivan, so to have the bloodstained back of the car focusing on the bumper sticker was a great little end to that.
Colby, what's your favorite fight scene?
I'll do a quick shout out to Wolverine versus Sabretooth part 2 or round 2, just because of the brevity of it. And I shared this with Luke when we were talking earlier, but I always think about that. Like when Wolverine is in this toe-to-toe fight, just cut their head off, bro. You're gonna win. Just cut their head off, and that's exactly what they did, and that really worked for me. But my favorite one was when they went back to Cassandra Nova with the Outlaws, and the moments and opportunities to see them all fighting together. We get to see Gambit's powers, which I also think are pretty cool. But then Blade held his own, Elektra held her own, and then Laura cuts off the Juggernaut at the ankles, which also is so obvious. If the superpower is once he starts moving, don't let him start moving. So yeah, I thought that was just really well executed, especially with the cutting back and forth between what was going on inside basically Cassandra's quarters, and then juxtaposed against the fighting, and then the arrival of Alioth. And I honestly didn't understand or didn't know. Did they? Of course, they were going to get out, but I thought it was really well done. Just the framing of them jumping into that little sparkle circle, the Marvel Sparkles now, I think is what they're calling them or something. And then Alioth coming at the same time. So yeah, I found that to be very entertaining.
I think the only reason that fight scene is not at the top of my list, because I also really enjoyed it, is just because of the camera work. It seems markedly different than all the other fight scenes.
Yeah, noticed that too. You're right.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of really close up shots and a lot of shaky cam, kind of like it almost feels like it, And I hate that I thought this, but I was like, oh, is this because this is the fight scene with all the old people in it? And like we need to be able to make sure that we can't really notice that they might be moving a little more slowly than everyone else or something. You know what I mean? Like, and then I felt really bad for having that thought. But, for whatever the reason is, it might just also be because there are more people involved in that fight, so it's like got more stuff going on.
We are in the superlative section, so I don't want to go back to any like nitpicking of it, but like I don't think this was like a particularly like well-directed movie. I wouldn't go back and be like, Sean Levy directed the hell out of this. It was sort of like everything's fine. It's you put the camera on these two and they're really fun. But I didn't like necessarily think that the like action scenes were like so incredible. There's people who are really adamant that he's a bad action director, and I don't know if I think that was bad, but I don't think it like stopped anyone who thinks that from thinking that. And maybe you're right that it was actor based for the shaky cam on that, but I did wish I wish we had gotten some of the longer shots, even if they end up getting a little CGI goopy. If you let things go on too long while you have people doing things that you humanly cannot do, it would have been fun to get a couple of those in that fight with the Outlaws.
So I think my response to that probably would be that the Hunter Deadpool fight, I really like that they did it like a side scroller video game. So I think that was the one part where I was like, oh, smart camera choice. Like I like this. But otherwise, yeah, I would be pretty neutral towards the directing of this movie. Which I think is the right move. I think as Sean Levy, is it Levy or Levy? Do we know?
Yes, both.
Okay.
I don't know.
Great. I feel like this movie feels like he just wanted to get out of the way of Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's the right move for this type of movie. But anyway, my favorite fight scene. So I'm going to pick the opening fight scene.
Okay.
And that is just because two reasons, actually. One is it is such a strong opening for the movie because it did the thing I didn't think it would do and actually made the concerns over what is this going to do about the ending of Logan? Like, is this going to undermine the ending for the character of Wolverine and Logan, and actively makes it part of the plot, right? That he's going to dig up Logan's body and use it in this fight scene. So that is like, I remember in the theater when I saw that being just like, my mouth was just open and I'm just like, I can't believe they did this, but it makes so much sense and it's so clever and so like in your face and really set the tone for the movie in a nice way. But the other reason is just the use of the song Bye Bye Bye. Because it's just like, and the dancing and just like in terms of, because I would actually say that the needle drops in this movie do get a little bit too much. Like we got a little too many, you know what I mean? Like it's like pop, 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 like all the time.
Yeah.
And which is fun, but I don't know, like after a certain point I was like, by the time we get to the Madonna song, which I guess we had already seen the trailer, so maybe that's why, but I was like, this is a lot. This is a lot. But I think in this moment it works perfectly just in terms of the pacing of the action with the rhythm of the song and then the dancing and all that stuff. It was all working together really well.
I
And you
agree with you
hadn't seen
100%.
enough of the
That's
movie to be annoyed. Sorry.
That's
go
true.
ahead.
Maybe that's what it was, is because it was fresh. All right. So we are running out of time very quickly.
I don't know if we need. I think we've already we've done the rhetorical situation.
Yeah, we covered everything
in the
kind of
earlier parts.
earlier
I
on.
think.
So
I don't know if
would
Colby
say
feels
let's
differently.
just.
Well, I don't know if Colby felt there was something to add.
I think we talked about most of it already. But go ahead.
There's this one. I was really my curiosity was piqued. That by this optional question that's in there, that sort of talks about the history. Because I am spending so much time studying history. So if I could answer that, I'd be happy to.
All right. So the rhetorical situation, a segment in which we look at a film through the lens of our academic experience. So all four of our regular co-hosts are writing professors. We'd like to have this section dedicated to making connections to our experience as scholars and teachers. Thankfully, we have a scholar of history with us today. And so, Colby, I came up with this custom question for you about history. Earlier, we talked about how this is really addressing this period of 20th Century Fox history and movie history. So, talk to us about, kind of as a historian, what added insight can that give us into the what this movie is trying to do?
So when you said that you had a history scholar coming on, I thought someone else was going to be joining the call, but you're talking about me, so I will do my best to take a crack at it. But I honestly do feel that if we back up to PT, you mentioned it before, even to Blade in 1998, I think is when Blade came out. Think about where superhero movies were in the 90s. And what I remember, what I think about is Batman and Robin, and how that movie not just killed the Batman franchise, but potentially killed superhero movies in general. And that's my personal opinion. I'm not saying that's what history says, but I just, that movie didn't work on so many levels. So if you're thinking of all the way back to like Superman was sort of the modern birth of the superhero movie. Batman sort of took that torch with Michael Keaton in the late 80s. I think it's 89, right? Sort of carried that through the 90s. Now, yeah, I will admit there are superhero movies sprinkled throughout that, but they didn't really hit pop culture radar. But the X-Men 2000, I feel like brought it roaring back. And not only did it bring the superhero comic roaring back, number one, it was very successful. But think about it, this is the first X-Men or first superhero team-up movie that we had that was of any significance in pop culture. It beat the Avengers by, 12 years? So although the MCU picked up so many years of storytelling to lead us to that very gratifying Avengers movie, the X-Men was a team right off the bat. They said, no, that was a very bold move. Bold by Fox, bold by Bryan Singer, who I don't think we like anymore, right? But bold by the studio, the movie makers, bringing Hugh Jackman in, bringing these iconic characters to movies. And it worked, and that's the point, right? If that didn't work, my question is, historically speaking, if we're talking about this corner of history, do we get an MCU? Do we get the Avengers? We don't get this movie, clearly. And did it have wobbles throughout the series? Absolutely. The Last Stand, the third X-Men movie, forgettable, right? Origins, forgettable. The Wolverine, okay. First Class sort of brought it back into success. Then they had Days of Future Past, which may have been the most effective sort of crossing of, it wasn't multiverse, but it was time travel, and it was super successful at it. And these movies gave us a framework, and I sort of referenced it before with the tribute video. It gives us a framework for what can be done with these characters going forward, especially when you get into the mutant era of the MCU, because now these characters are now, the rights are owned now by one corporation, and they can sort of do what they want with them, which is very exciting for me as a fan. The other thing, and I said I was going to try to be quick about this, I think that it's a very interesting history lesson for those that are interested in looking at it on corporate, sort of the business side of corporations and telling these stories, because Marvel was failing as a company. That's why they had to sell off the rights to these characters. And it's taken them 25, 30 years to get rights of characters back in play where we can have crossover events like we've seen in the comics before. And I think that that's a fascinating discussion, just how all that played out, how Sony got Spider-Man, how Fox got these other properties, how Disney ended up, how come Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver can be in an Avengers movie? That's an economics lesson, right? That's a history of economics and business. So all of it, the Fox characters are sort of at the center of all of that discussion, and you can't just dismiss them away as being like, oh, New Mutants, didn't watch it, right? Or Dark Phoenix, didn't watch it, which I didn't watch either of those movies, but they exist in this bigger universe of storytelling, and the history of that, I think, is very interesting discussion, and also can provide a roadmap to what not to do for future storytellers, as well as what they can do. Because we are supposed to learn from history as we study it, right? So anyway, that's my 2 cents from a historical perspective, that really Deadpool and Wolverine as a movie sort of brings that all into focus, in my opinion, because people that aren't aware of all this extra sort of meta commentary that we're talking about, if they're interested, this could sort of pique some interest in them and say, well, what is this Blade stuff about? Like, why is that a big deal? Well, boy, oh boy, can you go through and read up on a whole lot of interesting stuff if that interests you. So without Deadpool and Wolverine, that's not a part of the discussion. Fox characters just go away until the MCU decides they want to introduce them. But this movie brings them sort of forefront and center again in sort of this historical perspective.
Oh, I really love that. And I feel like what you're saying makes this movie actually more of a deliberate dialogue with the MCU than maybe at the top of the show we would have originally thought. Because we were sort of saying like, well, this is saying goodbye to a period. It's not actually engaging with the future of the MCU or where we're going with these stories. But what you're saying is making me think that it's Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman being like, look, we've been around a long time. Like, first of all, everybody needs to relax. Right? Like, because look at this checkered history, and we still think about it so fondly, and the highs I think were worth the lows, right? Like, you kind of make that argument in the sentiment of this movie, right? Because it's trying to reclaim things that were sort of embarrassments, right? In the 20th Century Fox history. And so using that as like a toolkit to think about the future of the MCU, to be like, look, everybody calm down. Do less hand wringing, have more fun. I think that's really cool. But then also, as you're saying, like, to really pay respect to this era, right? To be like, well, without all of the stuff that we're kind of engaging with in this movie, we don't have the next MCU movie. And so I think, yeah, it's and if that's true, and if that was all at all deliberate, that's really clever on the part of Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman.
Yeah,
I think the approach of, if I could just add this real quick, I'm sorry, PT, to step on you, but I think the important thing with history and looking at history is a perspective. That's always, for me, the primary motivator is the perspective. And this, simply put, the movie, I think, sort of recontextualizes a perspective of the Fox characters.
Yeah, for sure.
I just can't believe you were holding this when we had the whole thesis discussion, when you acted like, I don't have anything to say here in the thesis. But that's okay. I like you. I appreciate you keeping some bullets. I love all that a lot as well. I also think, just to add on to two of the points, that, Jen, what you were saying about like, oh, these were maybe mistakes, but they're partially, now we look back at them as mistakes, partly because a lot of those early X-Men movies felt almost embarrassed to be comic book movies. Like, especially when you think about like, oh, they're all in like black leather
Right, it's the spandex joke.
X uniforms, and there's the spandex joke. It's like they want to be the Matrix instead of a comic book movie. And that's something that we're so far beyond. And I think it is partially because it was like, can this actually sort of work in outside of the bubble of comic books and even like animated television? Like we had a couple characters that broke through in different ways: Superman, Batman, the Spider-Man cartoon from back in the day. But like, can we like get some of these other people too? And that did lay the foundation. I also think, and I hadn't thought of this part of it, Colby, what you were saying, that I think I hadn't thought of Days of Future Past as a baby steps multiverse story of like, well, what if we start going, it's just a time travel, it's just within the sort of world as it existed, but because we had different actors playing different characters, that did feel like almost a test run of letting Marvel know, letting the Marvel production company know, yeah, we could probably get audiences to play along with going to different universes, having multiverses, et cetera, et cetera. And the other thing I'll say is that, it's funny, the flip, I think maybe we talked about this last time with Guardians of the Galaxy. I feel like we've discussed this before, or maybe this was off mic, I don't remember, that, the reason that the properties that Marvel sold off to different production companies to make the movies when Marvel was hurting for money in the 90s was because like, well, these are the profitable ones. These are the ones they think people want to see, which is Spider-Man and Spider-Man associated people going to Sony, and then X-Men and Fantastic Four as the big comic book teams that went to Fox. And it's like, well, they can do stuff with that. Like those comics are really big and they have they're like the iconic ones. And then Marvel was like, well, we're stuck with these C and D tier people like that. And who cares about Iron Man or Captain America or Thor? And they were kind of like punchlines. And they were just like, well, when they announced like, we're going to start making movies, we're going to build up to the Avengers. Again, I wasn't like big into like reading comic books, but I knew I have like close friends who were there since like they were 7, 8 years old. And they were like, yeah, Avengers is like, that's like third, fourth tier. You can't trust them. Like they're just kind of whatever. They're just the leftovers. Like, I don't know. And of course, in the pop culture movie world, for people who are not in that zone, it's totally flipped now, where everyone loves Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man. Everyone loves Chris Evans as Captain America. And it's just like, yeah, Spider-Man's cool. They keep changing him out. Like, that's weird. And like the X-Men movies aren't very good. It's like, wow, we don't know. And so I think that beyond sort of the love and like the looking back, and beyond the sort of like the fact that the script is flipped, where like if you told people they're going to make a Deadpool Wolverine movie, if you go in back to like 1996 and they're like, we're going to make a Deadpool Wolverine movie, and it's the impetus is going to be that Deadpool really wants to join the Avengers, people would be like, what? Like, why would you do that when it's Wolverine? Why do you have him join the X-Men? Like, what are we talking about? That like, the everything has shifted so much. And I think that despite all the problems and all the sort of issues with the MCU, Marvel, the product, Disney and Marvel on some level are just like, if we nail the X-Men and we nail the Fantastic Four, like we are gonna be way back on top, because that's the stories that people already knew and already loved, that like we knew how to connect them, connect these stories to the audience even before we knew how to do the Avengers. So maybe it is sort of keeping this in people's minds and trying to hopefully be a pivot point, in their perspective at least, a pivot point from like the Avengers dominance to being like, maybe we do love the X-Men, and maybe you're going to love them after we do the Fantastic Four over the next few years. We'll hit the X-Men again, and then they'll be the dominant team up group in the MCU. I guess we'll find out.
It's
I think
just an interesting conversation, and I'm sorry I didn't interrupt you, but see how interesting of a outside of this movie conversation and what it fits into in a historical perspective. We could literally have a whole other episode just talking about this side of things. So I'm sorry, Jenna, I stepped on your.
Oh no,
your
I was gonna just make I'm just gonna make a silly joke that I think PT just made the case for why we need an Alpha Flight movie. Do either of you know what Alpha Flight is?
Do not.
Okay, so apologies in advance to everyone. So Alpha Flight is like the Canadian X-Men, basically. That's pretty reductive.
Oh, sure.
But it's this team of superheroes that Wolverine, when he goes back to Canada, Like the comics that I've read are, it's like he's been with the X-Men for a while, then gets called back to be like, you got to come home. Like, we need you. And then he like joins up with all these old friends, old superheroes he used to work with. It's really good.
I'd watch it. I'd watch it.
And especially since we got Canada jokes in this movie, like I'm not ruling it out. But wouldn't it be great Hugh Jackman as Wolverine in like a comedic Alpha Flight movie? I don't know.
I mean, Deadpool would join because he's canonically calls himself Canadian because of Ryan Reynolds.
Yes, he does.
Right.
And we haven't even touched on the singular vision of Kevin Feige and the effect that he's had on all of this, because if you remember, he was like some type of a lower level Marvel executive working on these X-Men movies way back in the day. So if you would like to put the tinfoil hat on, like our friend Greg McLaughlin says, Kevin Feige had it planned all along. We're going to we're going to do the whole MCU before he even anyone thought of it, as a joke, but really without his singular leadership, did we have the success that we saw with the MCU through the Infinity Saga and now this whole universe? So his presence and effect that he's had can't be forgotten.
Well said. And I think that's a good place to end. We've just hit the 2.5 hour mark. Colby, you fit right in with the long take. We've been doing better as of late, but this is our true form, the 2.5, the over 2 hour recording time.
I think for one of the Wes Anderson ones, we recorded for over 3 hours. The final episode was like 2:40 something. Because
Jen, we're going to talk for 3 hours. It should be about a Wes Anderson movie, which the only one I've ever seen is The Fantastic Mr. Fox, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I don't know if that makes me a Wes Anderson guy or not, but
No, well, that's a great movie. That's not a bad entry point at all. This is probably all going to get cut, but Colby, we were saying, have you watched any of the Mad Max movies?
I have not. I have not.
So, I mean, a lot of the stuff in The Void is very Mad Max inspired. Like,
they say Furiosa.
He makes a Furiosa reference when he holds up Juggernaut's head. He's like, I have your queen, Furiosa's head. But like the guy there's one, I forget who it is. It might be Pyro. Someone is like doing the same thing that Chris Hemsworth does in the latest Mad Max movie, where he's standing with motorcycles as his horses, like pulling a chariot, but it's the motorcycles from the first Captain America movie, the World War II motorcycles.
I didn't catch that. That's cool.
So yeah, like there's a lot of Marvel like references, but it's also a ton of Mad Max references, which is why we think we need to do like episodes either of your show or even like our show or whole podcast, where it's just we make Colby watch things that he should have watched and then talk about them.
God, if only I had more time. I'm graduating in December, so I'm gonna, before I start the master's degree that I'm hoping to get into, which will be fall of 2025, I'll have like this 9-month period of no school, so maybe I can fill in the gaps by critical analysis of these films.
I have bad news that fall of February. I thought you said February 2025. Never mind, that's not 9 months.
Fall. If everything goes right, but I do know enough about the Mad Max. I know enough about the Mad Max imagery to have caught those sort of like, oh wait, this sort of looks Mad Maxy to me.
Okay.
Even though I've never seen the movies.
Should watch at least one of the movies.
All right. Well,
we'll get into it. We'll talk about it.
It's very clear we could go on talking about this for 2.5 more hours.
Clearly.
But I'm going to spare all of you and spare our listeners. By now, it's just going to be Greg probably still listening. And he's probably, he needs to go too. So, Colby, tell us about the Colby Cast. Make your plug. Where can people find you?
Oh, everywhere they can find you guys, all the podcatchers. I try to be faithful and post things on X, Threads, and Instagram, but the Colby Cast is where I guilt my 2 sons into talking to me about nerd stuff, and they're getting older, and this is my attempt at keeping them talking to me and recording it so everybody can listen to us. But we do have a blast. We have so much fun, and we do talk about everything as we can. We're doing the House of the Dragon episodes right now, which is phenomenal. And we've got our Deadpool Wolverine. We talk about Marvel and Star Wars, anything really that is in those that are in those brands. You're going to hear us talk about, and then we'll just do some one-off fun conversations. Like I had my dad on one time, and we talked to my dad for an episode, and that was super charming. And we like to highlight positive, fun things. We've done a couple episodes about superhumans. We call them superhumans, and it's just normal people out there doing awesome things. And I think that if you're going to put your face in front of a microphone and put that stuff on the internet, you should add to a positive conversation and be something that people go to have fun and to enjoy themselves. And we do some thinking, but the whole point is like we're just being a family, and we talk about some fun stuff, and we put it out there for all to enjoy. So again, you can find us on those places. So welcome.
I really love that the three of you have very different perspectives on the same thing, and it's just so fun to listen to the different takes. And I also rely on you. You're my primary source of hockey news because I don't otherwise follow hockey. So
well, we'll talk more about hockey then if we know that people enjoy our hockey talk, because we are hockey people.
Yeah, PT's leaning into his screen being like, what?
Yeah.
PT, where they can't find any hockey here, but where can folks find the show?
I mean, I had to pivot to basketball from hockey this past year because the Celtics did so well. I was going to mention that Channing gave the second best Tatum performance of the summer after Jason, but then... whatever. So anyway, go Bruins, go Celtics, and go listeners to subscribe to the Long Take Review wherever you find your podcast. We're hosted on Jen's Substack, which will be referenced in Jen's outro momentarily, but you can also find us wherever you get your podcast. Wherever you're listening now, hit subscribe, leave us a review, leave us a rating. And if you want to follow us on social media, we're on Instagram and Threads at The Long Take Review. We're on Letterboxd at LTR Pod, or you can find our individual reviews using the hashtag LTR Pod on Letterboxd. Jen, where can folks find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Threads at SOPCHOCKCHAI. I almost forgot my own name for a second there.
It's a long episode.
This is because we've been recording for so long. And you can find me on Letterboxd at Qui-Gon Jen. Oh no, I didn't think about an outro quote.
No, there are no remaining that are family friendly.
I got one. Let's cuss and go.
Well, there is an edit of the trailers that just says "Let's go." It's very unnerving.
You know what one I liked, which I mean has no swears, but isn't necessarily family friendly, is when he says to the guy at the TVA where he's like, "This guy's ready to throw it all away." Because Deadpool looks so good in uniform, and the guy picks up his phone. He goes, "Are you calling your wife?" He goes, "I'm calling HR." Does your wife work at HR? That I have thought about that one. That's a good exchange.
I like it. Great. Thank you both. Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive new podcast episodes as well as written reviews of films with Oscar buzz and new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.